What's up everyone, how are you all? Today we are back with another blazing Naruto story. What if Naruto was betrayed by Konoha but trained to destroy them all? If you enjoy, then please like, share and do comments. And also check the description to original creator of this beautiful creation. A burning, white seeped through the boy's eyelids, stirring him awake from the dark swells of unconsciousness. He could neither see nor feel where he was. The last thing he remembered was his dark-haired friend, his brother, jabbing him with a crackling fist full of lightning. Sasuke had betrayed him, but what made it worse was not the fact that his brother had used his assassination jutsu to kill him. The last straw was that he'd used it to sever all ties between them. All ties with Konoha. He'd used it to kill, ultimately burning the final bridge that led back to Konoha. And that bridge was himself, Naruto knew. And it worked, right? So why did he still feel alive? How could it be that he could still breathe? Smell? He smelled lavender and something akin to the ventilated, sterile smell of a hospital. Scents that he'd smell every time he was close to death's beckoning doors. But he knew he wasn't in a hospital. Where were the voices of his teammates? The overprotective shouts of his Ba-chan? Wherever he was, it wasn't home. Upon opening his deep pools of blue, the boy was surprised at what he had found. Looking around slowly, Naruto found himself in a large room. He'd guessed that the comfortable mattress he was currently lying on was a bed, but did not expect the one he'd found to be fit for a king. Maybe even two. Nice digs, he mused. A grand table sat as a centerpiece in an otherwise lonely room, littered with plates, forks, and knives, but no food. His eyes shifted up and found a high ceiling. Across him 2 windows reached from the roof to the floor. Light permeated through them brilliantly, solely illuminating the entire room with sharp shards of light. The weird thing about the room was that everything, even the eating utensils sitting on the table, was white in color. And no shadows, impossibly, not a single string of darkness. Aside from him, everything was silent and still. He stood up, realizing that he could not feel any pain, despite the climactic fight which seemed to have happened only moments ago. He touched his hair in wonder, but felt no sensation. Surprised, he sat up, touched his cheeks and found that he couldn't feel softness or warmth. He wasn't just numb. It was as if he had no body, no tangibility. Hell, he couldn't even feel the floor beneath his feet. He told himself that this was just a dream and that he would wake up in a hospital. But, out of instinct, he walked towards the white windows, hoping to find out where he was. What he found, unfortunately, was an endless sea of light. Impossible. He felt small, powerless even, as his knees quivered under the bright ocean. His blonde, little head began to ache at the sublimity of his predicament, at the never-ending source of white, at his sudden spiriting away from his home, and at his friend's betrayal. When he found he could take the light no longer, he turned around and walked towards the table. He picked up, dragged, and sat down on a large oaken chair that bore intricate designs from an unknown origin. Possibly a language of sorts. He leaned into the white dining table, propping his head into his crossed arms, expecting for himself to wake up from some weird fox-induced nightmare. In his dreamscapes with the fox, he'd still wear his regular attire, but now was apparently not the case. No, he wasn't dead. He was in a dream. That's it, a dream. There's no way this can't be a damn dream. I need to wake up. I need to get that Bastar. Suddenly, the memory of the traitorous Uchiha piercing his lungs had rooted itself in his head, reminding him of the pain he felt he'd been pierced by that white-hot, chirping hand. The shock caused his legs to buckle, forcing him to rely on the sturdy table for support. He was numb a moment ago, so why was he feeling pain now? Instinctively, he inched his right hand towards his right shoulder, the place where Sasuke pierced his Chidori, readying himself for the pain. But what he experienced was not pain or the whole of the wound, but the smoothness of unblemished skin. Weird. Even if this was a dream, the wound should have still been there. Shouldn't my memories have manifested into a dream wound or something? He pulled down his collar, revealing no visible wound on his shoulder. Bewildered, he unbuttoned his white pajama top and lifted his shirt to reveal no seal on his stomach, as well. He knew not whether to feel happy or sad for the disappearance of the fox. But one thought came to his immediate attention. This wasn't a dream or illusion. He was dead. Near the Valley of the End, running and jumping, Kakashi and his summon, Pakun bounded for the Junin's 2 students. They were also accompanied by a team of Anbu. the group flying atop the canopy of trees peripheral to the Valley of the End. They all ignored the rain, but Kakashi felt as if the sky was punishing him for his imperfections as a teacher. As the unrelenting torrent continued to wade in his normally gravity-defying hair. The rain, which had quickly consumed the land, felt like lead balls colliding with his skin. He applied chakra to his feet to gain some much-needed traction. It was then that Pakun spotted a group of genin. Their genin. Kakashi himself was glad to see that they were all alive, though barely. Choji, one of Asuma's kids, seemed to be badly bruised and unconscious. Possible concussions, he observed. Neji had a large gash on his torso, and, judging by the exit wounds, was pierced by a large ballistic weapon at a high velocity. He needed to be treated immediately. Kiba and Akamaru seemed to be sleeping, but both looked battered enough to pass as dead. Kakashi sighed in relief when he spotted Shikamaru, Tamari, Kankuro, Lee, and Gaara rise from their hiding places in the surrounding brush, their weapons drawn in desperation. Had they intended to ambush anyone trying to attack their vulnerable friends? Smart, he noted. Color drained from his face, however, when he did not see his two students. Either of them. Relax. Kakashi raised his gloved hands up, signaling that it was safe. Only the other Anbu noticed that his hands were shaking. Can you report, Shikamaru-kun? No answer. The Nara child seemed to be shaken and perturbed about something, as well. They all had. Even Lee, who was now collapsing under the heavy rain. That's okay. The cat-masked female Anbu sheltered Shikamaru from the rain. Her voice played like a violin against a storm of brass. You all had a hard time. That, we can understand. But I expect you all to report to Tsunade soon. She then nodded to the scarecrow. Wordlessly, as if he'd never left the Anbu, Kakashi hand-signaled for most of them to escort the tired genin to the hospital, and, if they were unharmed, to the Hokage Tower. Once the Anbu left, only Kakashi, Pakun, and the cat-masked female were left to continue the search of Kakashi's students. As they leapt from tree to tree, Kakashi couldn't help but look at Yugo's graceful steps. She was a woman with equal measures of beauty and deadliness. A woman he had the pleasure of working with before on separate occasions. He was thankful for the way she soothed the kids, though they had yet to find his. It was minutes later that they'd finally arrived at the Valley of the End. The two Junin were very surprised to see the amount of carnage and destruction inflicted upon the land as they did now. At the very least, high Chunin techniques were used here. More surprisingly, they could both still feel the Kyuubi's demonic chakra eating away at the land's life force. The flora had already begun to rot due to the demonic power. But to Kakashi's horror, there lay his orange-clad student in the middle of the broken battlefield. In a tangled, bloody heap growing wetter and heavier and darker in the rain. From afar, both ninja could tell that the blonde was gravely wounded. And thus, they wasted no time in taking him to higher ground, lest they had wanted him to drown. The valley will flood soon, he could tell. The heavy rainfall allowed for the waterfall's flow to intensify, causing the floodplains to fill. Now safe from the rain, under the forest's thick canopy, Kakashi placed his favorite student's head atop his lap, praying to all the spirits of Kami that his sensei's son would not die. He wasn't religious. He'd never questioned himself or his Hokage, but his prayers were clear. Please do not take my student. Not before I. Tears began to fall from Kakashi's lone eye, though Yugao couldn't tell if the droplets were his own or the rain's. Opening the broken boy's soaked jacket, Kakashi saw a tremendous puncture wound placed on Naruto's shoulder. The silver-haired Junin's scowl deepened when he saw burn marks surrounding the open flesh, signaling that it was exposed to lightning, to a Chidori. Kakashi, despite his anger rising like a tempest, sobbed at this fact. Kakashi, Yugo's lovely voice sorrowfully spoke after she checked for the boy's heartbeat, I'm sorry. Naruto-kun is dead. It was then that Pakun, who had remained quiet until now, began to whimper, accompanying Kakashi's soft, bitter cries. Yugao, who hadn't previously met the boy, placed reassuring hands on both her comrades. Her heart wrenched at seeing the two stone-hearted ninjas' fragile hearts breaking. Kakashi was, in all his life, never one to cry. When his father, the Great White Fang, committed suicide, he didn't bat an eye, for he knew that it was for the sake of his father's honor that he died. He came close to crying once when his teammate, Obito, had sacrificed his life to save the entire team. Nearer, still, when his other teammate, Rin, supposedly became missing in action. No, instead of crying, the scarecrow buried himself in missions. Another time in which the last Hitaki nearly cried was when the last of his friends, Minato, had passed away. The entire village mourned for the death of the fourth that day the way Kakashi did every day. But now, it was different. The death of Naruto, his sensei's son, had truly hit Kakashi hard. It seemed that years of pent-up emotion had coursed throughout his entire being, manifesting into trembling and tears. His prized student had fought and killed his, by far, most beloved student, who was the last tie he had to his late teacher, his first team, like an orange ribbon connecting him to both his shame and his happiness. He did not know what to do with himself now that his precious ribbon was lost. Yugao, still trying to comfort both ninjas, waited for Kakashi's orders. She herself felt like crying, after hearing Kakashi's short, labored breaths. Yugao, he said softly, after about an eternity, his eyes still on his apprentice, please take Naruto-kun to Tsunade. Though she was hesitant to leave his side, she complied. And Yugao, he hesitated, now not caring about compromising her identity, please be careful. With Naruto, I mean. Nodding her head, she smiled sadly beneath her mask. I know. She then disappeared in a swirl of leaves. Pakun. Kakashi finally straightened himself. Why yes? The ninja pug sniffed. Get it together, please. We are ninja of Konoha, he tried monotonously, gripping his gloved fists in anger. But you're not handling yourself well, either. The dog tried to joke. Pakun. Alright. The ninja dog then growled animalistically. We have an Uchiha to find. Leaping in one bound, Pakun had almost grew 10 times in both size and ferocity. He now stood a whopping 12 feet on all fours. Not wasting any more time, he galloped towards the scent of the traitorous Uchiha. Now that his summon was big enough, Kakashi shunshined atop Pakun's back and rode him gallantly. They had a mouse to catch. Sasuke shivered under the cliff overhang that he and Kabuto stayed under. Though he was suspicious of the sound nin, the brunette had been smirking for the past hour. He'd finally proved his superiority over Naruto and Konoha. No one could stop him now, or so he thought. His smirk grew at the thought of learning under the best, and eventually, being the best. That would mean that he'd finally have the power to finally killing his older brother. Sasuke-kun, whispered the purple-clad, gray-haired nin, I sense a Junin coming. I believe you know him. Sharingan no Kakashi. The boy spat. The fool doesn't deserve the bloodline or the right to face me. Kabuto, you fight him. Show me the strength that Orochimaru promises me. The sound nin could only scoff at the Uchiha's insolence. The boy was a coward. The overhang was stationed only 10 feet above the valley's flood plain. He had to make this quick before the floodwaters would rise. Kakashi-san, Kabuto stepped out from the protection of the overhang and jumped below to Kakashi's level. I see your summon is of more use than I previously thought. No matter. I won't let Earth release. Diamond-like hardening, you little shit. Pakun growled, his claws elongating, becoming as hard as diamonds, taking the shape of sable daggers. The monstrous dog galloped towards the medical ninja, his claws ripping and kicking up the valley floor in stride. Behind Pakun, Kakashi stood still, rooting himself into the ground. He smirked, almost, confident that his comrade would exact his revenge on the poor medical nin and succeed. Pakun closed the distance, and then swiped his claws, only to hit the ground. The sound ninja was smart. And fast. Kabuto knew not to fight with a person more than twice his height, and with more than 10 times the lethality he possessed. But he'd do anything it took to win. Kabuto extended his scalpel to an impressive 3 feet in length and barely nicked the great ninja dog. He leapt back out of range just as Pakun came close to cleaving his head off. Arg! The pug grunted, irritated at the other ninja's hit-and-run tactics. Pakun closed the distance yet another time. This time he landed a slash on the nin's shoulder. But he also felt an impact to his side, which meant that he'd actually hit a replacement jutsu and he'd been hit by the real Kabuto. He noticed that the impact was Kabuto piercing his chakra scalpel into his hind leg. Nice try, but I also have hardened my fur. It'll take much more than that little technique to defeat me. The rock-hard encasements added several tons of weight, effectively slowing the pug's movements down. But fortunately, his new form, combined with the way the armor cropped only around his vital areas, made him agile. This was bad news for his enemy. Now standing on his hind legs, the towering pug then brought his paws up and moved each individual claw to cast 2 jutsus. Earth Release. Mud River Flow, Earth Release, Mausoleum Earth Dumpling. The first jutsu throttled the surrounding mud, made by the rain, down into the center of the valley, covering the ground with slippery earth. This impeded Kabuto's movements, who wasn't very proficient in walking on top of mud to begin with, especially under the stress of battle. The next jutsu was the Kicker. A house-sized earthen sphere formed from a rocky overhang, forcing Sasuke to evacuate the premises. Not caring for anyone's safety, the dog sent the large boulder towards Kabuto. Naturally, the Junin escaped his doom by using a replacement jutsu with a nearby rock. The giant boulder of stone sailed through the clone and into the side of the cliff. A plume of dust clouded the area as the boulder exploded, raining debris into the muddy river. Pakun smirked, using the debris to his advantage. Earth Release, Stone Lodging Destruction. Instantly, all the rocks generated by his previous technique, big and small, rose high into the air. And with a flick of his razor-sharp claws, all the rocks began to shoot towards Kabuto, who immediately shunshined out of harm's way. He hid behind a large chunk of debris, trying to think of a strategy, but Pakun did not allow him. He sensed a presence close behind him and dodged just as a chakra-hardened claw pierced the boulder like butter. Pakun ripped his claws out, sending chunks of earth into the air. With a twitch of his claws he kept them levitating midair, ready to send them into the medical nin's soft head. Pakun growled vehemently in fury for his fallen friend. Meanwhile, Sasuke had been sneaking away. He found himself far from the battle, sprinting quietly on the muddy terrain made by the cursed dog. He was dangerously close to the rising floodwaters stemming from Valley of the End's waterfall. He growled quietly to himself, trying to quell his feelings of disgust. Disgust, despite just killing a tailed beast's container, at how weak he was. Although he had gotten so strong, he was still running away from a clash between 2 powerful ninja. He tried reason with himself that it was the right strategy. He was tired from his battle, and he had no chakra left to spend, but he was an Uchiha. He was above cowardly retreats. He was above everything. As he traversed the open mud, he felt water touch his ankles. He summoned chakra to his feet to walk atop the surface, hoping that Kabuto would live long enough to lead him to Orochimaru. His hopes were crushed however as he saw his old teacher, Kakashi, who surfaced from the mud using a mud stalking jutsu that he'd used to following him most likely since the beginning of Kabuto's fight. It was foolish to escape a veteran tracker, so he turned around to face him, his body low and his hand on his holster. He looked around for any signs of escape. There were none. He chanced to look at Kakashi's eyes to see if the man was using the Sharingan. He wasn't, which both relieved and insulted the Uchiha. Instead, what he found was shame. Disappointment. There was no trace of humor in Kakashi's eyes. You wouldn't think of running away, would you, Sasuke-kun? Sasuke smirked dangerously back at his former teacher. You wouldn't hurt me, your own student, right Kakashi? Kakashi's stare darkened. You know, Sasuke, I could end you for killing Naruto, your teammate. Right here, right now. You remember what I said to you when we first met, don't you? Teammates who abandon teammates are trash. What are you gonna do, Kakashi? Take out the trash? I'm still your teammate, too, aren't I? Wouldn't that make you trash? Kakashi's gaze didn't falter. I guess I neglected to tell you about those who abandon their village. Those who abandon their teammates are trash, but those who abandon their teammates and their village. What's wrong? Don't know what to say? Sasuke wiped away beads of sweat, hoping his teacher wouldn't attack him. Suddenly, a rush of water cascaded down the valley. The torrential wave picked up rocks and mud in its wake. The raging river nearly knocked both ninjas. Kakashi was the first to react, jumping up and pumping enough chakra to float above the heavy torrents. Sasuke followed suit, possibly out of arrogance, maybe even as an act to prove to himself that they were equals, though he had trouble balancing, unlike the older shinobi. Kakashi breathed a long, tired sigh, then strengthened his resolve. No, Sasuke. What you did to Naruto, what you did to the village, it deserves no forgiveness. You are my student, and you killed another one of my students. Knowing Naruto, he probably gave you a chance to redeem yourself, didn't he? A chance at a normal life. A normal life isn't enough for me, Hitaki. I meant to soar over the cage Konoha confined the great Uchiha clan with. We were meant to be legends. I am the last Uchiha, last of the elite. And there is nothing you can do to stop me. Growing tired of Sasuke's bravado, Kakashi sought to incapacitate his student with only 2 words. Chidori Nagashi. Elsewhere, the ninja dog had been going to town on the deceitful snake. When the torrential stream came, Kabuto leapt up and used his chakra to stay afloat. Pakun, however, didn't give the water any mind, as the weight of his armor jutsu anchored him where he stood. His previous rock jutsu had been chasing his prey for nearly 10 minutes now. He could very well tell that the medical nin was growing tired due to the constant use of chakra in terms of dodging the hail of stones. Kabuto made a swipe towards the large pug's craggy plate armor, aiming at small openings between the plates. Pakun ignored the small attacks, slashing his keen daggers at the ninja, who always managed to tumble away. Having finished amusing himself, the ninja dog rushed the medic, working side by side with his long-range jutsu, which sent an assortment of stones, at breakneck speeds, towards the wide-eyed medic. Eventually, Pakun, whose speed increased exponentially despite the large torrent of water threatening to swipe them downstream, landed a few strikes to the back of Kabuto's knees, forcing him buckle under his own weight. Kabuto hissed out in pain, trying not to be swept away by the growing river, frustrated at being outclassed. It was like having to fight Orochimaru himself. But despite his situation, he chuckled madly. I may have lost, but Lord Orochimaru will have his prize. Within a moment, a jagged shard of earth pierced his chest, spraying a red mist into the cold air. Kabuto's eyes widened, breathing his final breaths before toppling over and sinking into the water, his body jetting downstream. Pakun had other plans as he grabbed the cold ninja out from the muddy river with the curve of his claws and sliced Kabuto's head off to ensure his death. He sealed the body into a blank sealing parchment and tucked it in his collar. The dog breathed a sigh of blood-spattered satisfaction. He made a monstrous leap at a ledge above the valley, using his claws to dig into the walls and vault his way up the cliff and into the safety of a plateau. It was over. No doubt that Kakashi had succeeded in apprehending the traitor, too. His thirst for revenge for Naruto's death, he smiled, was now satiated. It was time to move on. But he cursed, shit. Orochimaru's gonna come for his pup. I won't let him. Kakashi interrupted the dog's musings, causing the bear-sized pug to turn around. You can turn back to normal now. No one needs to know you can actually fight. At least not yet. Besides, I can carry my traitorous student myself. He motioned to the limp form of the Uchiha on his shoulder. You Hitakis, always ones for surprises. He poofed back into his normal form. Kakashi, after all that had transpired, had actually allowed a ghost of a smile to touch his masked face. I like to keep secrets, remember? You should know that by now. And with that, they began their silent trek home. Hey, Kakashi, you think that we should cremate Naruto's body or just bury it? The masked ninja frowned at the awkward question. We'll try to bury him. He answered. I'll ask Tsunade if we could bury him beside his parents. I doubt the council will allow that. We'll have to try. Kakashi set Sasuke on his shoulder. We'll have to try. He looked up into the sky, finding that, despite the unceasing rain, the clouds began to part and unveil the forgiving sun, who kissed the land with its triumphant, golden spears. Hokage's office. No. A blonde woman began hugging the cold, lifeless corpse of Naruto Uzumaki. Her tears covered his abnormally pale cheeks as hers met his in a tight embrace. She hugged him, futilely trying to bring him back from death's cold grasp. She knew that it was impossible, but tried anyways. This shouldn't have happened, he was supposed to live. Please, not again. Oh God, not again? She muttered softly as sleep had begun to claim her. Fatigue from her previous display of emotion had begun to take its toll. This is all my fault. Shizune had watched it all with Tonton, Tsunade's pig, clutched in her shaking arms. The clothed pig had not made a single noise the entire time, hoping that this horrible nightmare would end as well. The two medics had watched as Yugao burst into the office with Naruto in hand, screaming for help. Immediately, the fifth Hokage had begun to work futilely on Naruto's already dead form. Eventually, Shizune had to pull her master from the boy before her feelings would get the better of her, which would mean for very horrible things to come. The apprentice wouldn't dare try to imagine the cruel things the pig-tailed blonde would do to herself and others mourning over her loss. But then again, the Hokage wouldn't resort to ending her own life. Right? No, she was the Hokage. She was too strong for that. She had to be. After all, she had an entire village to lead, and had a responsibility to the very same village that she'd grown to love again. Carefully, Shizune softened Tsunade's monstrous grip on the boy's cold body, then quickly replaced him with Tauntaun. The small pig needed not to be ushered, for he'd already known that his owner needed the comfort. And then, with Yugo's help, Shizune carried Naruto to the village morgue, ignoring the happy cheers of the villagers for Naruto's death. Very soon, Shizune knew, the news would spread. People would talk about the death of the village demon. The entire village would probably rejoice and celebrate in bliss. But still, the medic ignored their seemingly infinite ignorance, for this was the time to think of Naruto and remember all the times he'd touched them without asking for anything in return. It was a time for mourning, not hatred. In fact, it was because of hatred that this accident had happened at all. And Naruto wouldn't allow her, nor anyone to think otherwise. After his arrival, the citizens of Konoha were enraged to see an unconscious and battered Uchiha on Kakashi's back. They didn't know who to blame, Kakashi or Naruto, even if the aforementioned was already dead. They'd either blame Kakashi for being an inadequate teacher, or Naruto for merely existing. But anyways, Kakashi headed for the hospital with his faithful summon, Pakun, by his side. They both strode with dignity, not caring if it had infuriated the villagers. They had a job to do, and not even the ones they had the responsibility of protecting could stop them. After several weeks, the Uchiha prince had already woken up after the burial of Uzumaki Naruto. His funeral was very short, and all who were close to him, even Sakura, the one who'd used him, had been invited. The funeral had been taken several miles from the walls of Konoha, since the council had refused to bury the boy beside his birth parents, despite Kakashi, Jiraiya, and Tsunade's wishes. The council normally didn't have power over such affairs. But after having the majority of the village petition against Naruto resting with all the other heroes, their decision was unanimous, leaving behind a very furious trio of powerful ninja. But after a while, all three accepted it, for they found a more meaningful place to bury their favorite knucklehead. They buried him at the very place where Naruto was first dubbed unpredictable, the very same place where he had begun his ninja career. The very same place where Naruto had rescued his teacher, Iruka. The forest of fallen leaves. The forest clearing, they mused, was the place where his shinobi career both started and ended. The forest had been a burial for many of Konoha's not very well-known heroes, such as most of the Namikaze clan, and the various shinobi who've immigrated there from the fallen Whirlpool country. This was the perfect place for Naruto's final resting place, for it represented his beliefs. Though Naruto wasn't appreciated for his many deeds, he was okay with it. He chose to work behind the scenes. The blonde didn't fight to be famous or powerful, but to protect those that he loved. Instead of being immortalized by being buried at Konoha's ninja cemetery and having his name showcased at the hero's monument, his friends buried him deep within their hearts. It was during his quiet burial that Tsunade chose to break the Third's law and unveiled Konoha's deepest secret, Naruto's lineage. Only a select, trusted few were told. The council had no knowledge of what had transpired on that sad, shameful day. Tsunade would later contemplate if the village deserved to know the truth as well. Only time would tell. About a week after he had awoken, Sasuke had been drafted into Anbu, under the supervision of Konoha's warhawk, Danzo. But not before learning the truth. Just before being drafted, Tsunade chose to reveal to him and the village the truth. The truth about Kyuubi and Naruto's true lineage. It wasn't that they deserved to know the truth, but it would be an insult to Naruto if she did otherwise. To say that the village was shocked would be a true understatement. But the most surprising detail in Tsunade's tribute was her emphasis on Naruto not being the Kyuubi itself, but the jailer. He was not the double-edged sword that the village tried to cultivate, but the shield that put its life before the village, hoping to protect them from the demon lord's wrath. And he did, with every inch of his life, from whence he breathed his first breath to the day he was ultimately betrayed and killed. That day, many villagers mourned not only for their loss, but for the error of their ways. Of course, the only one who didn't was Sasuke. As always, he had bottled away his emotions, preferring to isolate himself than sharing his feelings with others. The day he awoke, a train of emotions had rolled him over. He didn't know what to think, do, and feel, especially after learning Tsunade had surgically removed his cursed seal during his coma. This was all okay though, since being a root agent under Danzo didn't require the use of emotions. The cursed seal would only serve to keep him unstable, and Danzo had no room for reckless shinobi. At the end of the day, the Uchiha boy still had his eyes, though his eyes now belonged to Danzo. The Rookie 9 had been hit the hardest. After recovering from the Uchiha rescue mission, they all bore a deep respect for the blonde Uzumaki Namikaze. Hinata was not but distraught. Naruto's first admirer hadn't even the chance to confess him her feelings. Ino and Sakura were both equally sad. The two, during their childhood, refused to give the boy the benefit of the doubt and didn't give him the chance to open up to them. They all were to blame, and yet, they all didn't know the affect they had on Naruto's life. They would never know how grateful Naruto was for simply acknowledging him and giving him a reason to fight. Never. Truly, everyone, even Naruto's previous doubters, had felt true regret for the death of their savior, and for never appreciating him for what he truly was. A ray of hope, a beacon of light illuminating an otherwise dark world riddled with vehemence and deceit. Lord Danzo. A tall shadow bowed before his master's own as they both occupied a dark room that served as their meeting place. "What do you have for me, 32? The root head addressed his underling. Our men in the hospital seized Kabuto's body inside and replaced it with a lookalike. Excellent. Anything else? The taller shadow chuckled darkly as the rain, which had continued for weeks on end, battered on the lonely room's stained windows. Yes, our scientists have uncovered that the body we have is not Kabuto. No? The Warhawk replied without much surprise. We're positive. Our profilers deduced that either the man that fought Kakashi was never Kabuto to begin with, or Kabuto had replaced himself with a faux body prior to his supposed death. Both circumstances are within his range of abilities. We're confident that we are the only ones that know this. You're probably wrong, Danzo sighed. Tsunade must have noticed it, as well. Then may I suggest something? Danzo stared at 32 daringly before allowing him to continue. We interrogate the Uchiha boy. The faster we find out about Kabuto's whereabouts, the harder it will be for Orochimaru to steal him away again. Negative. Danzo scoffed. With Tsunade knowing about what really happened, she will have Anbu keeping a closer eye on the boy. And although our agents inside the Anbu are doing their best to stall them, an interrogation will not go unnoticed by them. We must keep the boy under our firm gaze. We must continue his training, as well as his mental conditioning. That is the only way we can prepare for when Orochimaru strikes next. But sir, the young shadow interjected, if Tsunade knows about what truly happened to Kabuto, then won't she notice that we replaced the fake body with a lookalike, as well? Should we undo what we did? No need. Danzo smiled devilishly. Knowing Tsunade, she has been working with Jiraiya for some time and they are both aware of both our intentions. That's impossible, the young man exclaimed with a sudden bout of emotion, which was unusual for a root agent. It is no problem. They won't do anything about us. Why? We have leverage. We know the whereabouts of all the previous Hokage's inheritance. I see. What does this have to do with me, sir? Your next mission. Though we know the location of this inheritance, we have yet to secure it for ourselves. You, as well as a team I have personally assembled, will receive letters in your home within a week's time. That letter will tell you the location of a dead drop. And that dead drop will contain the location, parameters, and timeline of the mission. You are dismissed, sir. The shadow then disappeared faster than a normal human could blink. Danzo stared outside in contemplation. The beating of powerful wings interrupted Castiel from his daily meditations, thundering overhead like a storm. The sound came from his friend who had flown in overhead and glided to his side, a bird returning to its cage. Castiel had been praying to his deity for many things lately, one of those things being success for his mission set to begin in the next few hours. The intruder settled beside Castiel, a breeze accompanying the intruder's landing. The intruder shook his strong wings before folding them into his back, inside his white toga. No human had ever seen them nor their comrades. Their true forms, that is. The form Castiel chose to occupy had trim black curls, a strong, lean body, and a stare of silent devotion. Though most would see this as coldness, he was as pure as the white pair of folded wings protruding between his defined shoulder blades. He dexterously turned to the other angel, who sported a wide grin on his angular, dimpled face. Gabriel. Castiel greeted his blonde superior, whose wings' feathers were disheveled from flight. Gabriel, Castiel's superior, was a loose cannon among their ranks. He disobeyed authority yet commanded his own. He wasn't a liability to their order. It was their way. Castiel gave him a curt nod, hoping that the powerful disturbance would soon leave him be. "How may I help you?" The man scowled, flicking his hair to the side, not liking how his blonde curls would tussle about during flight. Despite his carefree outlook, he was truly worried about his friend. "Cass, why did you accept the mission? It is thine duty to carry out thine orders." The taller man answered simply, almost accusingly, looking about as if the question was beneath him. "Or have you forgotten, old friend?" That had actually caused Gabriel to flinch. As far as he could remember, Castiel had always been the one to be calm and collected, even when carrying out orders outside their stronghold, their haven. Could Castiel, who was currently staring straight into his mirthfully blue orbs, be capable of spite and push him away? No way. "Castiel," he started, trying to remain as level-headed as his friend. "I am your superior, you know. I haven't forgotten my duties, but you do have a choice, at your current rank, whether or not to carry out orders involving the prophecy. Such orders can be shrugged off towards a soldier of a lesser rank." Castiel's usually stoic face had narrowed in annoyance. "Just as you had done many weeks ago? It was an easy order." The blonde flinched again at his friend's reply, folding his wings into his silk-covered back. "It could have taken you less than an hour to accomplish, Cass." Castiel's frown deepened at his friend's antics. He then watched as Gabriel began to grin at their exchange of words, almost mockingly, and scratch his head in apology, which in fact was apparently not good enough for Castiel. "You gave me an extermination job, Gabriel. It took more than a month just to find the target. That's beside the point. The fact is, you're traveling to hell." He watched Castiel's face soften at that. "And, you don't seem too affected by it? I've done so before, and you, of all people, know it well. Now go, you're interrupting my preparations." The winged blonde scoffed, then unfolded his wings before leaping powerfully into the air and circled above Castiel's head as he had finally glided away. Watching his friend leave, Castiel finally allowed a smile to reach his lips uncharacteristically. "I'll be okay down there, so stop worrying," he said quietly. Besides, only an angel can kill another angel. He'd had enough of this. For what felt like years now, Naruto suffered endless torment. Torture of the greatest magnitude. No longer was he in that painfully white room, but somewhere worse. Much worse. He believed he was in a different plane of existence entirely, a place the villagers would say he belonged in. A place called hell. He was no longer the loud, obnoxious brat that had tormented the entirety of Konoha, but another poor soul whose whole existence was a sin. He was the jailer of Kyuubi, after all. The reason why he was sent to hell, Naruto thought, was because of the Kyuubi's evil. At first, he felt that it wasn't fair how he was convicted of evil that wasn't his doing, but after what felt like 1,000 lifetimes of soul-deteriorating torture, a pale hand slowly squeezing and tearing away at his warmth, he had begun to believe them. All of them, even the shouts from the illusions of lynching villagers, when he was forced to relive all his terrible memories. He had slowly believed the lies which they had all snaked into his conscious thoughts. That he was evil, and that it was his fault for the strife in the world. He was glad that, after he died, the Kyuubi's soul was sent to hell as well. Though he still felt the fox. He felt the infernal fox's strong existence. He felt it scoffing at the tortures the demons tried to apply to it. And he felt it sensing him as well, laughing at the torture the demons were giving him. Naruto did not know how to react to that, but he was in tune to the fox more than ever, though he did not know to what extent, and he did not know where they kept him. And he did not care. Naruto had been in this eternal place for God knows how long. The lone ninja had suffered things that no man like he ever deserved to experience. Though his flesh was now gone, burned off probably, his spirit remained, as scarred as it may be. He wondered how anyone could go out of their way just to deliver to another such pain. here in a fiery city called the Necropolis. He knew the name because, as soon as he had left that perfect, white room many years ago, he was greeted with a merciless pain for many days. And as soon as he grew accustomed to that pain, which felt like an insufferable flame licking every muscle, every strand of sinew, a demon welcomed him. It laughed at him as it told him that evil such as he deserved to be confined in the deepest recess of hell, the Necropolis. There, calamitous souls such as he were confined in large cells of their own, where they'd writhe for all eternally. It was here that they'd torture him for what seemed like centuries, in a prison literally fit for a king, if that king were the king of tailed foxes. It was here that they had forced him to relive many of the most shameful moments of his past. And it was here that they forced him to do the most shameful act in his life. As he recounted his long stay, he had begun to grow sleepy, which was weird as the pain of merely existing here kept one from the coveted realm of unconsciousness. Slowly, his pale, blue eyes began to close. Sleep began to take over. Flashback. Naruto's naked form quivered as he was whipped for the 1000th time. He was an old, broken man. His muscles contracted in anticipation, but then relaxed, sensing, mostly hoping, that the red-eyed demon stopped. But he didn't. His muscles could now be seen, his skin opened like ribbons. Blood oozed out of every pore of his body, drenching the blonde with the vile, hot liquid. His wet hair looked as if he dived into a pool of crimson. His eyes, now bloodshot, burned as if he hadn't slept in days. If you were to look into his eyes, he'd have the look of a lamb right before its slaughter. Every hour of the day, he'd undergo some type of torture. And it never stopped. Eternal hell, indeed. He collapsed beneath the force of the whip, not even trying to fight against the assault made by the red-eyed demon, who seemed like he enjoyed the marks he'd left on the blonde man. As he was whipped, Naruto stared at the dark soot covering the floor of his cavernous prison, which seemed to stretch from realm to damned realm. The whipping continued, the whip cracking echoes throughout the room. The demon found himself entertainment when he lit the whip aflame, creating a thunderous sound as he willed the flames to engulf his instrument of torture. The demon's eyes widened in demonic fury as the Naruto began to cower towards a hole in the blazing cell, each step burning his feet, only to regenerate and burn in a beautifully cruel cycle. The demon stepped forward, seeing this as an invitation to play even more. His steps shook the room heavily as his black, ghastly mask came closer to Naruto, who was merely a shell of what he once was. The demon reared his ugly, black arm and struck the blonde once again with his fiery whip. Oh, how the demon enjoyed this. Enough. Please. The blonde man croaked, but not before carelessly spitting teeth out of his mouth, for he knew that they would heal again. Some sort of magical force would always, painfully, regenerate him to sat their cruel games. The first time he'd seen a limb grow back, he felt joy and relief, only to see it hacked off again. Just when will this all stop? What? Is that all, whelp? You think it'll stop just because you beg? The demon grinned his usual blood-thirsty grin. His red eyes stood out over his pitch-black form, which towered far above him, almost reaching the high stalactites which littered the cave like a great beast's maw. Naruto would never get used to demons, despite having one live inside him for his past life, for each one was always more ferocious than the last. The demon cracked his whip on Naruto's back again before continuing. Well, your pathetic whining actually gave me an idea. I'll lessen your torture if you do the torturing for a change. You won't be torturing me, though. I bet you'd love that. You'd be torturing the other souls. Who knows, it certainly builds character, and you might even work your way up to the Kyuubi. The demon laughed. Despite offering the boy a chance at the fox for dragging him down into hell, almost like an angry, furry anchor, he knew that the blonde was too pure to go through with the deal, but he still had to give it a chance. He had to admit though, the groveling man was tough. In fact, the man had actually stood up against him many times before, asking the demon to torture him instead of the other prisoners in the damned caverns within the infernal Necropolis. The blonde was always one to be the martyr. Even in death he'd sacrifice himself for his beliefs. But this was hell. Here, mercy and compassion were useless. And who knows, maybe the guilt would become a torture of its own kind. The blonde, in between strained gasps of air, spat blood into the demon's face. Never, you monster. I'll never stoop to your level. Without wiping the blood from his face, the red-eyed demon sadistically laughed even more. The man would pay for that. The demon grew giddy at the ideas that formulated in his wicked brain, ideas that would get this kid to break. "You can hurt me but you'll never break me," the blonde would always said. But this was hell. This was his domain, his and his brothers and sisters. "You may reject it today, whelp, but you will break. They always break." The ugly demon roared in laughter. "Never." Naruto spat before futilely sheltering himself again from the crackling whip. "Soon, whelp, soon you will break. And my offer, which I planted like a seed in your puny head, will sprout and you will become just like me." After a week of torture, Naruto had finally snapped. He had agreed to torture the other inmates in exchange for his own torture to cease. But little did he know that the guilt caused by torturing others would stay with him for all of eternity. He did not know how that lone choice would affect him and everyone he ever knew and loved, and how it could affect everyone in the entire living realm. Naruto didn't know that dirtying his soul in the torture of others would bring upon doom to the living world. In between interrogation and torture sessions, Naruto would mourn for the already dead souls. Though they were far from alive, they were still souls and it felt the same as taking away a child's innocence. In his natural life, he had always dedicated his life to protect people, but here he was destroying them, crushing their hopes of escape even if they knew, deep in their hearts, that escape was impossible. Escape, after all, was something that would never grace them, especially in the most infamous prison in all the realms. This was the point where Naruto felt he'd never be the same. He was changed. He can no longer become that kind-hearted ninja he used to be. Sure, he still had his values, and he still had his beliefs. But the one thing the demons in hell had taken away from him was his reason to live as well as his spirit. They finally broke him. The demons made him one of their own. A tenebrous predator of the night, stalking the blazing halls, waiting to pluck from his prey their sparkle. And what was worse was that he was good at it too. In fact, he was the very best torturer in all the planes of hell combined. Every time he was ordered to, he'd commit to his job and would later hear the product of his work. He would hear the screams of those poor souls, screaming like a trapped animal because of his handiwork. And every time that same red-eyed demon, Makul, would order Naruto to torture the next soul, his own would shrivel and wither away at the shame his handiwork caused. All this because he chose to be selfish and choose the easy path. If he knew back when Makul gave him a choice of being the torturer or being the soul being tortured that his choice would bring him such suffering, then he never would have chosen this path at all. "Tell me," the blonde coldly asked his latest victim, "why are you here?" "B, because I am a killer." The small ghost of a man quivered under each crack of the metal-tipped whip Naruto carried. "Wrong," Naruto said, a little more harsher than before. He summoned a gothic, black knife out of his holster and sadistically sliced the man's inner thigh with its jagged edge. The blonde frowned unsatisfied when the man didn't scream. The soul of his victim felt so much pain, so much guilt, that it now was out of breath, apparently. "Tell me the truth. You know it, and I know it too. Tell me the truth or I'll fucking carve you out." The man could only whimper as he was forced to suffer through the guilt from his sins, and, even worse, Naruto's interrogation. "B, because I don't deserve a second chance. I killed that small girl. I killed her and she didn't deserve it. I do," he finally cried out. "Good." The blonde interrogator adopted Makul's dark smile. But deep inside, he was crying. Crying because he turned away from what he had always prided himself in being. Crying because he'd betrayed everything he believed. For the next few days, the soul of the killer would be forced to endure Naruto's session. Then, Naruto would move on to the next soul and the next, having to regret his deal with Makul each and every time. End flashback. Naruto's unconsciousness began to deter, but his eyes were too weak to open. What was weird was that he no longer heard any of the screams and the moans of the many other souls that inhabited hell. In fact, he could hear nothing at all. Weird. He opened his eyes and found himself lying down in complete darkness on some sort of flat surface, but didn't have the energy to sit up. And so he closed his eyes and waited, thinking that this was just another form of torture. Makul is probably tricking me into making me think I'm alive or asleep or something just to pull me back into my cell. He whispered to himself. "Whatever. Just get this over with, you damn demon. Your tricks won't work on me anymore." He yelled, surprised at how his voice resonated, as if he were alive. As if he were alive and trapped in a box. His suspicions were confirmed when he felt around and found wooden walls surrounding him. Even if he could sit, there wasn't any room for him to do anything other than lying in place. He was trapped. He waited for a few minutes until he was able to move his neck, and then his feet and hands. After a while, his strength had started to rejuvenate due to some unknown force. The same unknown force centered mostly around the end of his left tricep. But that did not matter, for he gladly preferred this to hellfire. He quickly found that he wasn't in his torture chamber. Instead of the sound of cackling fire and the constant smell of sulfur, he was encountered with darkness and the strong scent of rot. He tiredly felt around, not liking that his chakra levels were too low to focus into his eyes in order to see in the dark. Wait a minute, his chakra levels were low? The last time he remembered being able to use chakra, much less feel it, was back when he was alive. Could this be part of Makul's illusion? He promised me he'd stop torturing me. He panicked. He waited for the demon's laughter outside of the box he was trapped in. All he heard in response, though extremely muffled, was a small crack of thunder. Or what sounded like thunder. He shouted. Very convincing, Makul. The chakra feels real. It even feels warm. But we had a deal. I help you damn demons with the torturing and I receive no torture in return. Still no answer. Naruto also noticed that he wasn't naked anymore, but wore a silken garment on top of his skin. It felt cool and smooth beneath his fingertips. They were like the ones rich people in Konoha wore out of tradition. He also felt that the wooden walls surrounding him were cut precisely for his body size. He then deduced that he was inside a death casket, belonging to those who were already dead. That explains the smell of rot. What is this? Could the demons have devised a type of torture that forced one to experience being buried alive? Naruto hoped desperately that this wasn't an illusion. No, he was very well alive, he thought. But how? He inwardly shook his head. Now was not the time for doubt. He was alive again. The fact that he was breathing, though barely, certainly proves it. In any case, he couldn't afford to lose hope, not like how he did in hell where he cracked and succumbed to Makul's dirty offer. He had a second chance. He'd never take the coward's path ever again, he promised himself. Never, even if his oath would find a way to kill him again. Besides, he'd been to hell before. He'd had enough guilt on his plate. He then began knocking on the wooden casket, trying to find a soft spot to break through. Finding a loud spot in the middle of the wooden prison, he braced himself before punching hard into the old wood. At first, it didn't work due to his relatively weak state, but he banged even harder as soon as he heard cracking, when suddenly, earth had finally begun to spill through the wooden walls of his prison. He grasped for whatever air he could before the entire coffin was filled with cool earth. Minutes later, after worming his way through the moist soil, he finally snaked his hand past the surface, and held onto something secure. He felt water on his hand for the first time in what felt like several lifetimes and wondered if it was raining. He hoped so. He then forced his other arm through the gravel and held onto what he thought was a tree's root, relishing the cold, wet sensation on his hands. Pushing his legs, he thrust his mucky head into the cold surface, allowing him to thankfully gasp for air. He never thought he'd ever do this again. He felt a strange, pelting sensation on his face and laughed. So that's why I heard thunder. Light rain wet his dry lips and provided for him more energy to continue. A minute later, his entire upper body was above ground, and, with a quick push, he was finally free. 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 He felt the soft rain enveloping his entire body in its brilliance, in its reward. It had rained when he died, the world mourning for his loss. But in rebirth, the sky cried again, in happiness. He felt free, he felt liberated, he felt alive. Naruto, not able to stand up at the moment, opened his weak, dusty eyes to see that it was night time, and began crawling towards somewhere warm and dry. He was given a chance to live again, and he wouldn't dare to waste it. He didn't dare try to figure out what caused him to be reborn. He didn't even try to find out if this was just an illusion or not, as he maneuvered past bushes and various other shrubbery. All he knew, at this very point in his new life, was that he was thankful. And nothing, not doubt, not Makul, not even the questions raised by his rebirthing, could rain on his parade. Except maybe the rain, of course, he mused inwardly. He felt various pieces of wood on the ground, so he guessed that he was in a forest. He didn't know quite why he was even buried in a forest, and why the ground was littered with so much bark. But frankly, worrying about his new life was more important. He soon found a hollow tree that seemed fairly dry. Without complaint, the relieved blonde began to gather leaves to cover himself in his little sanctuary. And though he didn't have much chakra, he still had enough to keep his body heat from leaving his exposed body. He was given a second chance, he'd repeat to himself. A second chance. This is gonna be a long night. He laughed aloud. Curling himself into a bed of dry leaves, the blonde allowed for sleep to claim him, not caring if this is an illusion anymore. Whatever demon may have allowed him to experience this must have been compassionate, for he hadn't felt happiness in a long time. He waited for sleep to claim him, hoping that the tree would keep him warm until morning. A groan escaped the blonde ninja after he awoke, finding nothing but the familiar white room. He was back in limbo, the place in between the plane of the living and the plane of the dead. He remembered this place because he'd been here before, right after his death at the Valley of the End. He then guessed that feeling his chakra, crawling out of his grave, and feeling the soft rain were all just an illusion that McCool managed to conjure up. Oh, well, he sighed. Living was fun while it lasted. He had to hand it to those damn demon taskmasters though, cause that illusion was pretty realistic. He sighed once again, not noticing how he still wore the silken robes of Konoha's deceased. After taking a good look around, Naruto noticed he was in the exact room that he stayed in the last time he was in limbo, only this time he was standing oppositely to the bed, right beside a mirror fixed to a vanity chest of drawers. He stayed still, waiting for the next torture, when he looked forward and saw himself in the mirror. He was a healthy boy again, not the scarred, evil creature that let the whispers of hell enchant him. Aside from the clothes, he was exactly the same as when he died. What sort of torture is this? Naruto's thoughts were interrupted by shuffling, causing him to turn around. What the boy saw was something he'd never seen before, a man with a pair of beautifully folded white wings on his broad shoulders. He'd dark curls and equally dark eyes. He wore magnificent white robes, a kimono of sorts, that stretched far from his neck to the ground, trailing behind as he seemed to float towards Naruto. The man approached him like a master approaching a slave. His chin held up, yet his eyes stared down to Naruto's own. The man stared at him in interest, as if they were friends. As if they were equals. The stranger looked like the pinnacle of grace and clarity, as he lowered his hard jaw in humility. I am surprised that you are able to see me, human. The others were right, you are special. Who are you? Naruto settled into a sloppy stance, forgetting how he hadn't fought or sparred in quite a long time. The man dressed in a white kimono stood taller. I am an angel of God, Naruto. My name is Castiel. What? The boy flinched before settling back into his stance, reaching his hand back to where his kunai holster should have been. The jig is up. I already know that this is just an illusion, you stupid demon. I am not lying, Naruto. I was the one who pulled you out of hell. You escaping the depths of your grave, as well as falling asleep in a large tree were real, Naruto. This may be limbo, but you are very much alive. I merely took your soul from your unconscious body as soon as you fell asleep. But I will return it as soon as my business with you is done. Castiel watched as the boy subconsciously felt where the burning sensation used to be, underneath his right tricep. Ah, I'm glad to see that it doesn't hurt anymore. I wouldn't worry, Naruto. Only the pain is temporary. The mark isn't, though. It will be permanently engraved to your skin. But you can see it as a testimony that you have escaped from death's clutches, with a bit of help, of course. Confused at the unknown man's statement, Naruto nervously checked the spot on his arm he had been subconsciously touching, only to gasp in awe as he saw a hand-shaped black mark at the base of his tricep. He sighed in defeat. If those damn demons existed, then maybe these guys did as well. So, let me get this straight. You are an angel? After seeing the brunette smile, and then nod, the blonde boy continued. And you helped me escape hell? Why? Castiel chuckled at the young one's distrust, because we need you. Who is we, exactly? Naruto's eyes squinted in suspicion, drawing an unsurprised look from the angel, who began to sit on the white bed Naruto stood opposite to. I spent countless centuries in a burning prison, so forgive me if I don't trust you. To be frank, Naruto, you physically only spent a single year down in the pit. And as to who we are, I mean everyone and everything. This surprised Naruto for the second time. We need you to save the world from complete and utter annihilation. The boy-turned man stared at the angel in scrutiny. The angel sighed sadly at his distrust. He began playing with his powers, making an apple float from a fruit basket sitting on the table. You wouldn't need to save the world in a long time, but we need you to prepare. We need you to get stronger. What for? What am I saving it from? The blonde made a beeline towards the middle of the room after hearing the words, stronger. He grabbed a white chair from the table, spun it, and placed it directly in front of Castiel before sitting on it. There was a traitor among my ranks ages ago. We sealed him in hell for a very long time, but he escaped. With the help of you humans, we were able to seal him once again. But ever since then, he's been gathering and collecting his powers. Eventually, he'll break free of his fiery cage once again and destroy our world if he is left unattended. He will ride this world into the sun without your help. Fortunately, he won't have the power to free himself for a very long time. But right now we need you to prepare so that we stand better chance for the world to be saved from his power. Castiel remained monotonous, completely ignoring Naruto's heated glare. This is the best time to prepare, Naruto. We need your help. But why is this happening? And why should I trust you? You can trust me, I assure you. I aim for humanity's best intentions. The reason why this is happening is because the first of the traitor's seals were broken. A seal? Like a sealing technique? What caused it to break? Castiel's face narrowed grimly, eyeing Naruto accusingly. You did. How? The first seal is broken when a righteous man in hell commits an evil act. I think we both know just how you did it, Naruto. But I didn't intend for that to happen. I wasn't even supposed to be in hell in the first place. It's all that Fox's fault. If it weren't for him or that damn red-eyed demon, this all wouldn't have happened. You don't believe that, Naruto. You don't believe that it wasn't the Fox's fault as much as yours. But despite that, your opinion does not affect the world's future. Your actions do. You are the one who triggered the wheels of the apocalypse to roll, so you are the one who is responsible. You can either point fingers or you can take responsibility. You choose. Then I choose free will. Naruto eyed the angel defiantly, but shrunk into a corner of the room for fear of the heavenly creature's wrath. Then you choose the world's doom. Are you so selfish that you'd choose your own needs over humanity's? You've been given a great honor, Naruto. You've been given a second chance. You are the chosen one. To deny it would not only deny you of your glory, but it will also expunge the world its promising future. But I don't want to be the chosen one. I don't want all this responsibility. I don't deserve such a role. Have you seen me? Seen what I've been reduced to? I'm a mere shell of the ninja I used to be. I've been cooking in the pit for so long. Things like glory, the future. They're both things I don't deserve. Don't blame yourself for the sins you've made. It was all fate's work. You may have been the one to turn the wheels of the apocalypse, that you are at fault for, but you are not to blame for torturing those guilty souls. Also, no one is blaming you for breaking the first seal. You would have with or without the red-eyed demon you speak of. It is your destiny. Wait. A bead of sweat ran down the nape of Naruto's neck. You know what I did down in the pit? Yes, I do. I am your guardian angel, if you will, and I have been so ever since you were born. My job is to observe as well as protect you, and have been doing so all these years, despite knowing you'd one day break the seal. At this point, Naruto was visibly shaking uncontrollably. If you knew what was happening to me, then why didn't you fucking pull me out of hell before I went in? Why couldn't you have saved me before Sasuke killed me? Your job is to protect me, right? Well, if I am so damn important, then why the hell did I have to suffer through all that? The demons broke me. They took pleasure in my torment. Where were you, guardian angel? Where were you when you could have prevented my suffering? I didn't have the clearance to save you at the time, Naruto. It is law that angels don't interfere with human affairs. What happened down there wasn't human at all. Naruto's cheeks were now red, but he wasn't angry. He was disappointed. What happened down there? I don't think I could ever forget it. Naruto, I am truly sorry. But it is only now that my superiors gave me the order to save you. Castiel's features softened. He truly felt pity for the man in a child's body. He once knew two men who'd gone through what this poor boy had. He'd missed them, but he knew that they were in a happier place. Please know that it wasn't you who deserved to go to hell, but the Nine Tails. You, Naruto, are a righteous person. You may have taken the wrong path, and you may have broken the first seal, but there is nothing we can do to reverse them. We couldn't prevent it, even if we tried, but we can surely do something about it. We cannot change what has already happened, but we can change what will happen. The two stayed there, Castiel sitting atop the large bed, Naruto crouching into a corner. After a long time of absolute silence, the boy stood up, walked towards the angel, and sat at the foot of the bed. What exactly am I going to expect? What should I do, now that I am this chosen one? Naruto was quiet, but his eyes were firm. The angel made the apple reappear in his hand and smiled. I can't tell you what you will face against, but whatever non-human you will encounter you have to kill. How? Were there demons on the surface, as well? Naruto thought. There is a way for you humans to fight those that aren't. You may not know it, but I tattooed to your back a set of seals that hold a special type of weapon that could kill almost anything as long as it isn't human. It is our ultimate gift to you, Naruto. How about angels? Can it kill you too? Naruto inquired. Castiel uncharacteristically snorted in amusement. There is an exception to everything, young one. However, this special type of weapon was originally designed to kill demons. But yes, it can kill angels as well, unfortunately. That had caught Naruto's attention. With this weapon, he can kill the very creatures that forced him to submit until he was him no longer. Though he liked the sound of those words, he didn't think it was possible. Demons? I thought that they couldn't be killed. And don't they reside only in hell? They can't escape hell, can't they? Such notions are false. You would soon learn that such feats are very possible. He stopped for a beat. Demons, like any other abnormal being, can live in the mortal realm as humans do. And as so, they can be killed as well. Very soon, you will see the world for what it truly is. Understanding what the angel had implied, Naruto sighed. What does this mean for me? Don't get me wrong. Every fiber of my being wants to punish each and every one of those demons. But where do I go from here? I can't just march back to Konoha and tell everyone that I faked my death. Naruto, before I answer those questions, I must ask of you to join our cause, for if you don't then we are all doomed. After a moment of considering his words, Naruto finally said, all right, I will join this cause, but this isn't making any sense. What is going to happen, and when will it happen? I am not permitted to tell you the details, but I will do so anyways. The angel took a breath and continued. You are not to go back to Konoha, not for quite a while. The reason why is that after the breaking of the first seal, more seals will begin to break as well. It is your job to prepare for the time when all the seals break. We don't know how long it will take for all the seals to break, seeing as how there are hundreds of thousands of them, but once they all break, the traitor's cage will be lifted. What we do know, however, is that it will take many years for all the seals to break, giving you enough time to prepare for the one who betrayed heaven. Who is this person who is bringing upon the apocalypse? Who is this betrayer of heaven? Like I said before, he was an angel like I, only stronger and of the highest rank. He was an archangel before falling into the depths of his madness. His name is Lucifer. I see. Naruto pondered. If I'm not going back to Konoha, then where will I go? Naruto, listen carefully, for what I will tell you is threefold. Firstly, a year has passed since your death at the Valley of the End. You already told me that, but how? Heaven and hell are planes that are above time, as you call it, above reason. But let's not dwell on that. Second, you will have to go a place in Lightning Country, called Mount Ashigari. There, you will find a cell of hunters that will teach you how to vanquish demons and other such creatures of darkness. You are to train with them until I call for you. Hunter Nen? What do they know about demons? And don't they only work for Kirigakure? These are hunters, not Hunter Nen. They are a group of people that have been around far before ninjas have roamed the earth. They are humans, like you, but they know of the supernatural. In fact, like the name implies, they hunt the supernatural. With their help, you can survive demon attacks and successfully do things that no normal ninja can. Thirdly, you must not lose the ultimate weapon. If it falls into the wrong hands, then the result will be just as bad as the apocalypse, for its power is greater than even mine. You are its chosen holder, Naruto. You are, once again, humanity's savior. I guess I don't have a choice now, do I? Naruto bitterly chuckled to himself. Of course you do, Naruto. There is always a choice. It is just that this one choice will save the lives of people you do and don't know. Do not worry about this sudden change of lifestyle. It isn't so bad. And do not worry about fate, either. Just focus on your training and all will follow through. This brings me to the third point, which is to enjoy the new life that you're given. The time to act won't take place in a long time, but the time to prepare starts now. Castiel, right? The angel nodded in reply. How do you know that? Naruto asked, hoping that the angel would give him a good answer. Castiel smiled. Angel, remember? Do not worry, I will be watching you. But how will I contact you? I will contact you when you are ready. And with that, Naruto was ejected out of limbo and continued on with his sleep. The rain pittered and pattered against the glass windows of the Hokage's office. It was a rather dreary morning in Konoha, for everyone and everything ran as slow as molasses that Saturday morning. There was a storm the night before, of which was rare in a country of fire, meaning that something big may have happened. Humming an off-key tune, Tsunade decided to end the paperwork for the day, as early as it was. She shuddered at how long it would take to do her job if she didn't use the shadow clone technique. It was one of the things that she had adopted from her favorite ninja. She smiled at that, causing her serene features to wrinkle a bit. Ever since Naruto's death, she had dropped her eternal illusion, surprising the entire civilian populace in so doing. What was the point of fearing time? What was so bad about age? Those were a few of the many questions Naruto had asked her a long time ago. She laughed bitterly at that. Naruto, the only light she had during those trying times, was the answer to the same questions he'd asked her. Thanks to him, she wasn't afraid any longer. Not of time, not of the sight of blood, not of anything. Thanks to him, she grew up. The moment she heard about his death, exactly 1 year ago, she'd realized that death was inevitable. And so was aging. Of course, she wasn't at all old looking for a 50-year-old. Any citizen in Konoha would say that she looked as if she were 2 decades younger, as if she were in her mid-30s. Of course, her features were somewhat wrinkly. But with a little makeup, some would say that she had aged quite beautifully. Jiraiya was the first to say that she looked great even without the genjutsu. In fact, he'd even remarked on her still being bangable. And of course, what kind of woman would she be if she didn't beat the crap out of him? She may have been a hothead, but she was a consistent hothead. Being how he was, she couldn't help but smile at that memory. He, too, became her light when she mourned over Naruto. It was a pity, however, that the student had to pass the torch over to the teacher. It should have been the other way around. A sudden knocking interrupted Tsunade of her reminiscing, causing her to sit erectly. Duty called. Suheim. An obnoxious voice called out from behind the door. Shuffling was heard and Tsunade couldn't help but sigh as the guards tried to prevent the old sage to enter her room. Ever since the death of Naruto, she couldn't help but keep everything in high alert. The market, the training grounds, the hospital, and especially the academy. She wouldn't dare imagine another bright child dying at the heavy hands of the wicked. I don't care what the rules are, I'm going in. Jiraiya protested against the guards. Let the dumbass in already. Tsunade screamed after growing quite tired of waiting. A chorus of "Hi" was chirped before shuffling of feet could be heard. Then, without warning, Jiraiya slammed the broad, double doors open, and entered with a giddy stare. Thank you, Suheim. He greeted her without bowing. Like always, he always wore his bizarre, green and red attire, with his horned headband with the kanji for oil, and his wooden sandals. Despite his formal clothing, he always had that warm, sure grin. Jiraiya had confidence, some would even attest to it being innocent, and he knew Tsunade both hated and loved that about him. Get to the point already. I don't like wasting time, especially since I'm on my break from the paperwork. Tsunade sighed again while Jiraiya looked around in mild nostalgia. Fine, he said as his eyes bore into his former teammates. My informant from Ashigari Township in Lightning Country didn't meet his deadline yesterday. You remember Yatsuro, right? Yes. She stared in mild surprise, her hands below her chin. He is your informant? That's right. I could only hope that he ran out of writing supplies, but I highly doubt he did. You, of all people, know that he's a hardy individual. You've diagnosed him once before, haven't you? It takes a lot to get him sick and it takes even more to injure him. That damn geezer. He must have gotten himself in trouble. I need you to send a specialist there to check on him. But isn't he as powerful as you, if not more so? That's beside the point. The point is that someone, or something, might have attacked him. And we both know that the only creatures able to harm him are well out of our realm of power. I don't want to take any chances. I want you to send a hunter. Tsunade gently rubbed her temples, knowing quite well the severity of the situation. Knowledge was power, and thanks to her ex-teammate's spy network, Konoha had a lot of it. And to some extent, control. Thanks to Jiraiya's spy network, Konoha was, and still is, the strongest country out of all the elemental nations. Both in military and in economy. Losing a powerful informant such as Yatsuro would definitely harm their control. And to top it all off, the fact that someone was able to harm the hardy informant astounded the Godem Hokage. She couldn't risk relieving Konoha of its security to face a danger she knew no one was capable of handling. She had seen ninja facing ultimate doom before. She had spent numerous weeks mourning over it too. If Jiraiya's fears were true, then spending resources on this task would just spell more meaningless deaths. Shouldn't you be the one to investigate, though? It is, after all, your spy network. We both know I can't afford dimming down the patrols and spending resources over a lost cause if what you're saying is true. I do intend to investigate for myself, but I need help. Whatever caused Yatsuro to miss his deadline must have been one of those creatures he told us about. Whatever got him may not be human. Whatever got him is, very much so, out of my league. I need someone who is powerful enough to handle this creature. I need a hunter. Hunters don't work for Konoha, but we both know I need your help to excuse him. Rest assured that no harm will come my way. Or Konoha's. But I didn't ask if you'll be okay, Tsunade argued. We both know you're worried about me, Suheim. Jiraiya countered idly. He leaned on her desk and placed his fingers atop hers. I'll be fine, I promise. You won't lose me, ever. Alright, the blonde Hokage finally nodded in agreement. I'll send with you Tenma Tenmaki. He is the only hunter left in Konoha. I appreciate it, but what of his wife? She's a hunter, too, isn't she? And didn't they retire from their professions when their daughter was born? Tsunade merely shook her head. Tenma is the only hunter cooperating with us currently. All the others work solely for the conclave and refuse to answer my letters. And as for his wife, you'll have to ask him that yourself. Jiraiya noticed the sad tone in Tsunade's voice. He'd have to talk to Tenma about his wife later. He then lifted his hands from Tsunade's and retreated towards the window. So it's settled then? You're fine with him accompanying you on your mission? Of course it is. And thanks, Suheim. He smiled at her warmly, grinning at the blush that had reddened Tsunade's cheeks. I believe a hunter of his caliber would greatly help me. Watching her ex-teammate turn his back to leave via window, she cried, please come back safe, you idiot. Momentarily, he turned his head to smile longingly towards her before leaving her alone with Smoke. Later that night, in an open field at the base of Mount Ashigari, fear radiated from a lone figure as he ran away from the tree line of a thick forest to an open field. His labored breaths and the rustling of bushes were all that could be heard, for he had been running from something for the past hour. Whatever was chasing him was toying with him, for it knew that the old man was pushing his withering body far beyond his limits. He was old. The fact that he had ran for so long surprised him, especially under the dark pitch of night. The old man looked behind to see if he had lost his pursuer, but he stumbled in so doing. As he collected himself, the bush he passed by earlier rustled violently. His pursuer was close. The old man desperately picked himself up, sensing that his chaser was closing in. He ran a bit further into the middle of the wide field, and then looked back again to see who was chasing him. He saw a glimpse of the man that followed him, but fear told him to turn away and flee. He did, but as soon as he turned to run away, he found himself in a dead end. In front of him was a raging, white water river. Surely, if he were to take so much as a step in it, he'd be pulled away to his utter doom. The old man gave up and stood still, his heart still racing at the hour-long chase. He did not turn around, for he did not want to give the pursuer the pleasure of seeing his frightened face. He then heard light footsteps from behind. This was his end. Give up, you old geezer. The chaser said humorously. Or should I say demon? Quote, the old man, despite his old and tired-looking state, dropped his charade and began to chuckle darkly, as if he were possessed. The pursuer continued. You're trapped, demon. Leave this man be and go back from where you came. I believe that it is you who is trapped, boy. The old man spat in disdain. He turned around to face his pursuer. Neither men could see each other's face for it was too dark. I planned this from the very start. The man, who was shrouded in a white cloak, saw the old man attack citizens in the nearby village prior to their chase. He didn't see the demon vessel's face at the time, but he'd begun chasing it as soon as he spotted it. He did not care what the demon's plans were. He was still the hunter, the demon was still the prey, and this was still his hunt. What the hell are you talking about? What's so funny? He questioned, but tensed when the demon walked towards him, laughing as its voice distorted in its power. Fool, do you not know who I used as my vessel? Then, the demon lifted its head, letting the moon's silver gables illuminate his pale, withered form, revealing to the hunter the face of its vessel. You bastard! The man roared in unrestrained hate, after seeing that the demon possessed old man Yatsuro, his master. He saw amidst the old wrinkled features, and the thinning gray hair, the demon's sadistic smile. He was like a fucking priest. A good man. You did this because of me, didn't you? Didn't you? Why, of course. The demon sing-songedly barked. I wanted to taste hunter flesh, but the only way to do that was to raise this wretched man's corpse from the ground to lure you into my web. But how? The thickly veiled man protested. Demons can't possess corpses. He was dead for nearly 2 days. I have friends, boy. Friends whose powers are greater than any of you mortals could imagine. Raising the dead is a chore compared to the feats they've accomplished. Now, I believe it is my turn to give chase. You'd better run, before I devour you right here, right now. Fuck no. The man stomped adamantly, defiantly. You've sullied my teacher's name. He raised me like a son, you sick, twisted son of a bitch. I won't repeat myself. Who helped you raise Yatsuro's corpse? Tell me or I'll shove your sorry ass back to hell. The demon, whose stance widened at the hunter's threat, began to growl sounds no natural creature could possibly make. The hunter felt power so great it caused tremors in the dark ocean of grass that surrounded them. Even though it was such a dark night, the veiled hunter could still see the demon's deep black, pupilless eyes. The demon extended his right arm, his hand poised towards the hunter's obscure face. He then squeezed his fingers into a fist, willing for the man's head to compress into mush. However, nothing happened. My power. What have you done to me? The demon roared in confusion and annoyance. The hunter replied simply by brandishing his bare chest from beneath his cloak. The demon saw a vast array of seals tattooed to the man's heart and chest. The hunter had been anticipating their battle. So, hunter, you came prepared. He chuckled, not really caring for this minor obstacle. However, it matters not, for simple spells and seals cannot stop me from unleashing my wrath. Now, the demon's hand, of which was originally poised towards the hunter's head, faced the ground. Then, his hand started pulling on some invisible object from the ground. Oh, how little did the hunter know. As the vessel's thin arm began to struggle to summon forth some kind of power, orbs of flame began to dance in the demon's wake. The balls of fire started growing, and when it stopped, each orb looked to be about 10 feet in diameter. The orbs then began to dissipate, each beginning to take the appearance of a gigantic canine. They snarled, smoldering in their fiery, yet solid bodies. They surrounded the twisted demon, fiery sentinels guarding their master. The creatures you see here. The demon began to walk towards the creature to his left and began petting its hind leg. The demon's hand did not burn, though the surrounding vegetation did. These creatures are hellhounds. I hope you are ready, hunter, for these beasts that I summoned came straight from hell. Wordlessly, the hunter jumped over the beast to the demon's right. In mid-air, he drew both of his daggers, each the size of a human femur. The hellhound readied itself for an assault and began to swipe at the hunter with its long, fiery claws. The hunter, still in flight, parried the creature's deadly claws with one of his daggers, ignoring the heat that radiated from the tremendous paws. However, the heat only intensified when his parry had caused him to land on the hellhound's smoldering back. He wasn't worried, for the seals in his clothing protected them from the elements. But of course, that hadn't meant that he himself was resistant to the flames. He held his breath, as each inhalation caused volcanic air to flood his lungs. He then aimed his daggers at the creature's head, but the other hellhound didn't have any of it. The next thing the man knew, a great ball of flame had escaped the other hellhound's burning maw and was quickly flying towards him. At the last second, he disappeared and then reappeared crouching underneath the hound and impaled the great beast with his daggers, causing embers to cling to his naked neck. He made no noise as he ran towards the hellhound's head, allowing for the daggers to slide with him in so doing. Cries of the fiery beast's pain could be heard throughout the surrounding forests as he finally slid his daggers into the great beast's head, twisting each blade viciously to confirm his kill. However, what happened next caught him by surprise. The great flame that had consumed the legendary beast intensified, causing it to glow and smoke. And then, in a conflagrant display, the beast exploded in a fiery mess. He disappeared once more before getting consumed in the beast's last stand, causing some of the surrounding vegetation to light a flame in his place. The increase in smoke forced the hunter to cover his face with his cloak. He looked around and found that the burning flora would soon cause a forest fire. If he did not finish the demon off, then he too would be consumed in flames. "Good job," a demonic voice growled from behind him, before he was brutally kicked towards the remaining hellhound. "But nothing you do will be good enough to defeat me." Though the force in which he was kicked was great, the force of the hellhound catching him with its claws and thrusting him towards the ground was even greater. He silently winced as the weight of the beast's leg pinned his chest to the burning ground. He cursed at the pain. The creature roared in victory, but before it could feast on the man, he had disappeared again. Only this time, in a plume of smoke. What happened next was surreal even to the demon's eyes. After seeing the hunter escape from his summon's grasp, he saw the hunter reappear above the creature, a Chikuto sword reared behind his head to strike. With a quick movement, the hunter cleaved the hellhound's fiery head right off. Effortlessly and efficiently. This act, too, had caused the beast to explode, but a quick maneuver helped the hunter to land correctly and gracefully in front of the demon, whose growls of anger served to amuse the hunter. "I'm impressed." The demon mockingly clapped before suddenly running towards the hunter. "But we both know you don't have the guts to hurt your beloved master." In retaliation, the hunter, using his Chikuto, drew blood from his own hand, then slammed the bloody blade into the burning ground. This triggering seals that lit up in contrast to the darkness of night. The seals forced the demon to be suspended in his step, incapacitating him to the highest degree. The hunter laughed. This was his victory. He had successfully captured his prey. His amusement grew into a full-blown laugh after seeing the once proud demon squirm and struggle in dire desperation. "What was it that you said, asshole? Nothing I do is good enough? I don't have the balls to hurt my own master? My master died 2 days ago. You aren't my master." The demon stopped struggling and began to grin once more. "You plan to kill me? This trap may have worked as you have intended, but it won't last. As soon as I get out of this weak shell, then I'll find you and kill you." "You actually believe that?" It was the hunter's turn to grin menacingly. This demon killed his master. Revenge was the only thing that mattered to him at this point. He threw away his cloak, revealing a sweaty upper body. His lean muscles glowed in an orange hue due to the ring of flame that surrounding the both of them. He wore white, loose-fitting leggings, and an equally white hunter's mask that had completely blotted out his narrow face. "You'd be dumb to think I don't have some sort of weapon to fight you. Us hunters were trained to exorcise things like you. Your fate was decided the moment you raised my master from his resting place." He pulled his bloody blade from the ground and held it horizontally. The demon saw that the blade's metal, beneath the hunter's blood, was black. He gasped. It could only mean one thing. This Chikuto's blade is blessed. It was made by smelting and layering 100 metal crucifixes together, and it was cooled off with holy water as well. "Say your prayers, demon. Your fate is sealed." Panic struck the demon's face. The demon felt fear, a feeling it had pretended to show earlier when he was chased, but had now experienced for the very first time. The demon didn't like this new feeling at all. And because of that, the hunter almost began to feel guilty at what he was about to do. "Almost. You won't do it." The demon stuttered pathetically. "You wouldn't destroy this body just to exorcise me. My master already died, you dipshit." The demon tried to find even the smallest trace of mercy in the hunter's eyes, but found none. "You killed him, remember? I won't allow you to live and walk on this earth, even if destroying my master's body is what I have to do." But then, the demon laughed manically, causing the hunter to flinch in shock. Had he missed something? Well, in that case. The hunter cursed when the demon suddenly let loose a wave of demonic energy. The face of his teacher grinned once more as a black mist began to escape the vessel's mouth. The vessel's face paled as the ghastly mist receded into the night sky. The hunter knew what this had meant. The demon was escaping its vessel, manifesting itself into a mist. A demon mist. And due to the intangibility, it was able to escape the effects of his masterly crafted seal. He roared in anger, knowing that he'd lost his chance to exorcise the demon. He heard demonic laughter even as he could see the black mist no longer. "I will meet you once again, hunter. And when I do, I will make you pay for thwarting me." The hunter yelled back, "And I will send you right back to hell." He sighed as the demon had seemed to have disappeared completely. He sealed his blessed Chikuto into a sealing tattoo the shape of a cross in his forearm. He didn't exorcise it as planned, but he had won the battle. No doubt the demon would rear its ugly head in the future, but there was no reason to believe that it would do so soon. Demons were a cowardly race. It would take time for them to recover. And when they do, they'd usually come back with more of their friends. He did not fret, for he had friends of his own. Sighing once again, he took a look around and found himself in a field of flame. In a while, the forest would burn. He'd better hurry. He then picked up his old teacher's corpse, wanting to bury it somewhere better. As soon as he put Yatsuro on his shoulder, it had begun to rain. What perfect timing, he mused. It wasn't the hard and stormy type of rain, either. No, it was soft and light, but still enough to douse the flames, preventing it from reaching the forest, where many, many animals lived. He chuckled briefly before also picking up his cloak and sealed it into a scroll. He looked towards the raging stream and left the field without a word. Hours later had passed and it was no longer night. It was now dawn, but the rain had not ceased since it had started pouring. Now that he was further down the river, the hunter decided that this place, a place where animals normally went to for nourishment, was the perfect place to bury his master. This special spot would make the perfect new resting place as his master. Quickly going through a few hand seals, the hunter cast a simple earth jutsu, sending both him and his teacher's corpse underground. Minutes later, only he re-emerged. Another set of hand seals raised a gigantic boulder from the earth. He placed it over the spot where Yatsuro was now buried. And on that boulder was written, "For the best damn teacher in the whole fucking world. Rest in peace, Yamahara Yatsuro." He then walked further upstream, until he reached a small area where he was sure people wouldn't find him. A clearing in the forest, close to the river. Trees covered every direction. He didn't worry about flooding because it didn't seem like it would rain for long. In fact, the rain had already begun to disperse. He went through even more seals, erecting a tent from the ground. Happy with his temporary shelter, he walked towards the river, which was not as fast as it was downstream. He dipped his blades into the water, cleaning it until the blood washed. He noticed that he was smiling happily. Happy that the only thing that dirtied his blades were ash from the hellhounds. Happy that his master was now rested and that his master's body wasn't tarnished during the demon possession. He was willing to harm his teacher's corpse if it meant exorcising the demon, but was glad now that he didn't have to. It didn't matter, anyway. If he were to exorcise the demon, it would still be alive, in hell. That fact alone had always annoyed him. No matter how many demons he'd exorcise, they would always come back. He wished there was a way for him to actually kill off those damn things without having to deal with them again. He then thought about how the demon managed to stick its ugly presence inside a corpse, and his master's corpse no less. It wasn't natural. And yet, nothing about his job was natural. He sat still as he thought about his late master. He began to walk to his tent after wiping his blade dry and resealing it. He stopped in his tracks, however, when he heard the bushes behind his tent shaking violently. He'd been awake for quite some time now. Though he was still lying on his makeshift bed, in the center of an old hollow tree, he could still see the sky. It was, to his delight, a wonderful summer morning. Birds were chirping, and the breeze blew by quite nicely. Overall, it was like any other day in Fire Country. However, something was off, and he knew just what it was. It was the trees, or rather the absence of any living tree in the immediate area. At first, upon waking up, Naruto noticed a lack of any animal noises in Konoha's forest. Then, he noticed a complete lack of forest altogether. Rather than green grass and the soothing presence of life, there was only death and rot. He took a few steps outside his shelter and almost tripped on a tree. All the trees seemed to have fallen away from something. But what? He looked towards the hole, the grave the villagers buried him in. He then looked around and noticed that the place looked like a meteor had fallen upon the place, for there was a crater surrounding the hole where he'd slept eternally. When he was crawling about the night before, he noticed that the trees disappeared. But now he knew where they were. On the ground. That explained why he had such a tough time navigating the area. Someone, or something, had pushed all the trees in the surrounding area flat into the ground, uprooting them and making a very dirty mess. He'd also realized that the area in which the trees were pushed formed a great circle, and that all the trees that were pushed down were pushed away from one central point. His grave. This was Castiel's doing. This was a testament of Castiel's power, he thought. This had taught him that angels probably had enough power to completely devastate the land. Maybe even worse. All this was done for the sake of dragging one such as he from the fiery depths of hell. But that did not matter, for he needed to move to his destination. And that destination was Mount Ashigari, in Lightning Country, wherever that is. He had a duty, an obligation to an order of creatures he didn't believe existed before his coming back to life. But more importantly, he had a duty to his fellow humans, for now he knew that everyone was at risk of confronting demons or anything as horrible. He needed to learn how to fight these unnatural creatures, and he knew where to learn it, and from who to learn from, as well. He wasn't surprised to see himself wear the same black funeral garments that the dead wore during funerals. He'd seen himself wear them in his dream. He was glad that he wore his old ninja sandals, though these seemed a bit too small on him. It was a fair price to pay, for traversing with small sandals was much better than trekking through countrysides without any footwear at all. He swatted away all the dirt and leaves that covered his sides, happy that he didn't have any problems during the night. His smile, however, was wiped completely off his face when he saw that surroundings were very familiar. Naruto, the ninja, began to hear a voice, surprising him for what seemed like the 100th time that morning. "What is it? Who are you?" the blonde asked, looking around erratically, for the voice that seemed to have come from every direction. "This is Castiel. Do not forget your mission. Travel, learn, and master. You need to accomplish these tasks if you want to save your race, and all the others, as well. We all depend on you." The boy sighed, and then relaxed. He found the angel's voice very comforting. He played the idea of having a guardian angel watching over him. He began to walk northeast, the direction where he knew where Lightning Country resided. "How can you talk to me?" "As angels can do more than you think, young one. Much more than you think is possible." And that was the last he'd heard for a while from the angel. Steeling his will and convicting his step, he marched on to Lightning Country, hoping that he'd soon get to Mount Ashigari. For he knew that ignorance was bliss. He'd wished that he still had a normal ninja life. But then again, what could be better than learning how to kill demons? He'd finally get the chance to make them suffer instead. Lightning Country. The bush shivered as if it could somehow feel the cold. Well, it was cold, but the hunter doubted that the bush was charmed in any way. Something must be lurking behind it. He took a few steps closer to the trembling plant when he'd heard animalistic grunts and the sound of twigs snapping. He drew a single knife, thinking that an animal or monster was behind the violently shaking plant. Hoping that the creature saw him, he made himself look intimidating by standing taller, snarling back at the creature hidden behind the plant. But once the bush stopped moving, and once he'd heard no more noises, he inched closer yet again, readying himself for a monster attack. However, when he grew tired of waiting, he checked the bush. It was just an animal. It was a large gray wolf, its sleeping form limp with fatigue. It must have tired itself out from trying to get itself out of the bush, he thought. He noticed that the wolf had deformed ears, stubby as if it were still a cub, and that some parts of its anatomy were out of proportion. A close analysis had confirmed that this creature was female, and that it was not a wolf at all. He'd read about these types of creatures. Well, forced to read about them, really, by his younger brother. These creatures had the shape of wolves, behaved like wolves, and even fed from the same prey as wolves, yet they weren't. No, these creatures, though were similar, were actually bigger than wolves. Much bigger, able to reach the size of elephants. This wolf-sized creature was a Fenrir cub. A female Fenrir cub. Seeing that it needed his help, he picked the large beast up, and mounted her on his shoulder. He then walked to camp and placed it into the shelter of the stone tent, right beside the warmth of the fire. After the laborious task, he called forth, from the earth, a bowl made out of stone and walked towards the river, hoping to give the cub some water once it wakes up. When he finished scooping some of the fresh water into the bowl, he placed it beside the sleeping Fenrir. He sighed. Usually, hunters like he didn't help supernatural creatures of any kind. They preferred to keep the balance, punishing those that tried to tip the scales, and hunting those that tried to harm or prey on humans. And here he was, tipping the scales. He was in for an earful, no doubt about that. What made it even worse was that he didn't regret doing it. Although his pride in his mind, but mainly his pride, had told him to leave the she-cub alone, his compassionate side told him otherwise. But wait a second, how did the cub get here? In his spot, sitting next to the cub, he mentally slapped himself. The cloak-clad hunter realized that the auras from battle he'd had prior to this moment must have scared all the creatures in the forest. Though he had no doubt that its mother must have left it in the rush of leaving to protect its other children, he doubted that the mother would come back for this one. This sleeping, fuzzy creature was all alone, and would be her whole life if he hadn't saved her. Sighing once again, the hunter lazily stood up and walked towards the river. He needed to catch fish for food. He hoped the Fenrir cub could eat seafood. Babies needed their nutrients after all. Fire country. Gray and dreary weather was the type of weather that the toad Sannin loved, especially during missions. The sight of overcast skies, rain, and the smell of earthworms were all things that gave him comfort. It had begun to rain hours ago, but he'd already anticipated it. He found protection from getting wet inside his favorite sake bar in his favorite village. When the rain stopped, he finished his pint, stood up, and headed for the market district. Tsunade's orders were simple. Find Yenma and the man would do the rest. Based on his memory, Yenma was not only just a Junin. No, he was far more than that. Yenma was a hunter. Jiraiya didn't know much about them, but he knew just how powerful this particular one was. He also knew that hunters seek to find some sort of balance. Whatever that balance may be, he didn't know, for his knowledge on them was very minimal. However, his knowledge on what they did hunt weren't as minimal as his knowledge on hunters in general. Either way, he needed to question his old friend on that topic. Other than Yenma and Yatsuro, he knew only one other hunter, which had explained why he knew so little of them. His experience with them, to put it simply, was eye-opening. Outside of battle, they were just as enigmatic as they were in battle. And in battle, they were treated with equal measures of both fear and reverence. They carried themselves with so much pride, yet they all seemed to carry some sort of burden on their shoulders. A dark burden, but fortunately not a lonely burden. Only one thing was certain, they needed to be treated with caution. Unfortunately, the sage was on his way to one's home right now. Broodingly, the Sannin made his way through the village's market district, weaving his way through young adults who were trying to find deals for the produce they'd wanted. He then headed for the most infamous ninja facility in the entire district, a place that his old friend, Yenma, owned. It was a place called the Roadhouse. It wasn't much of an impressive sight. Although the exterior of the establishment looked small, he knew that the interior was pretty large. Looks were indeed deceiving. He noticed that Yenma, or at least one of his workers, had coated the building with a new shade of white. Now, it had looked newer than it did during his youth. The roadhouse had been here before his own birth. He didn't actually know when it was built, but it was there for a long time. What he did know was what the establishment had been throughout the years. He remembered hearing from Tsunade, during his years as an active ninja, that the place had suffered a tragic, yet suspicious, fire incident. It was through the Shodem Hokage's strength and compassion that the place was rebuilt. Rumors have said that the wood in which it was rebuilt was chakra-infused, thanks to the first Hokage's power. There hadn't been a recorded fire there since. The sage, after taking a good look at the place, began to step inside. Once he did, he smelled right away the scent of booze, and that of newly forged metal. Deep inside the store was a forge that Yenma personally used as well as for his business. Not only did the man own a bar, and an inn for people to stay in at the top level of the building, he'd also owned a store that sold many weapons and accessories. All in one establishment, too. At the center of the main room were chairs for people to eat. It wasn't so much a bar, but a bar. Along the sides were pool tables, dartboards, and other things that ninjas entertained themselves with in between missions. Behind the bar, he knew, was the store. He didn't quite know why it was placed there, but he didn't give a damn. It did, however, give him a sense of danger every time he'd go inside to buy things he'd need, or to restock on supplies. During his days as a Junin, the Toad Sage had loved this place to death. Like the people here were doing right now, this place was his go-to place in between his missions. This place, where he'd had so much fun times at, was now where his current mission now started. Passing by the tables, the Toad Sage forced himself not to challenge some punk kid in pool. It was his favorite game. He strode towards the bar, ignoring the stares of awe that many of the ninja there sent his way. He smiled, he liked feeling as though he were a legend. Oh wait, he was. He now stood next to the bar, nodded towards the man behind the counter. Hey, Kyoru. Is Yenma here today? The bald man wearing an apron nodded back, mirthfully playing with his beard in nostalgia. Why, I haven't seen you in a while, son. How has life been? Don't stall, Kyoru. And damn it, don't treat me like a hormonal little kid again. I'm an old man just like you are. The sage pouted playfully. Jiraiya, you may be older, but you are still up to no good, I see. Yenma's in the back room. From the sounds of it, he's probably just finished that project he was working on. I think he was fashioning his daughter a new Nodashi for her hunter training. Already? At her age? Those swords are huge. You think she could handle it? The sage asked. Now it is you who is stalling, Jiraiya. Go now, I have customers to deal with. The man opened for Jiraiya the black-painted door behind him, ushering the sage inside. He then gave the fabled sage a wave, knowing that he'd see him again when he leaves. Upon entering the outlet store, the first thing that Jiraiya saw were weapons. Sharp and deadly weapons. Along the walls were blades of all sizes, staves of every length, and clothes with many hidden compartments. He'd automatically felt the heat from the forge's furnace, taking away some of the moisture in his mouth. Each and every one of the weapons that were proudly displayed on the walls were the very same ones he'd seen Yenma personally use in the heat of battle. Yenma had actually been the first hunter that Jiraiya had seen. The first impression he'd gotten was that they were strong. Very strong. He didn't quite know how, but hunters, to his experience, were capable of felling great beasts. He'd even seen the Yenmaki easily defeat Gamabunta, in a great display of power, after he asked him how powerful he was. Truly, from his experience, it was safe to say that probably all hunters were as skilled in battle as his friend. Well, the experienced ones at least. However, Jiraiya hadn't even experienced Yenma's full strength. Though he doubted that this mission was anywhere near action-packed, he still hoped that he'd see his friend at full power. Jiraiya? A friendly voice queried from behind the Toad Sage. Oh, please. Don't tell me that you're early for a change. The Sannin turned around to see Yenma, who had apparently walked in from the bar that he too had just been in. The hunter had looked like he always did, only his shoulder-length, dark brown hair had grayed, and that the skin at the sides of his eyes crinkled with every smile. Other than that, Yenma didn't change much at all. Jiraiya crossed his arms, a smile now tugging at his lips. Damn, Yenma. You look great. And how's the wife and kid? If the kid's any bit as talented as her father, then I'm pretty sure she's doing good. The kid's okay. Her hunter training is going along pretty well. But, the man's normally warm smile shriveled into a frown. The blush now left his cheeks. But Jiraiya, being the immature one of the two, didn't notice until it was too late. She's starting her hunter training already? I heard that the training was brutal, even for my standards. But hey, what's the matter? Is this a bad time? No, my old friend, the hunter tried to say reassuringly, it's just that Ao died recently. Yenma, the old sage patted his friend's shoulder. I'm so sorry. I really didn't know. Are you and your kid faring well? Let's sit down. They both strode back to the bar and they each had found themselves a stool. The bald man from behind the counter nodded towards Jiraiya, knowing very well that his boss, Yenma, needed a friend at this time. 2 beers, Kyoru. On me. Jiraiya glanced at the bartender before turning back to his friend. So, tell me what's going on. I'm all ears. They say that letting it out helps the soul, you know. Well, the man tried to gather whatever pride he had left. Jiraiya had never before seen this side of Yenma. And frankly, the old pervert was worried. Well, me and Tenten are fine. Especially Tenten, she's always been like her mother, he sniffed. How did she die? The hermit asked, hoping that he sounded sincere. Death dealers. 20 of them. She died fighting. He suddenly began to quiver. His voice faltered as well, but she died strong. Jiraiya could only nod in understanding. He felt so hopeless. His friend was hurting, and he couldn't do anything about it. If only he were as good at this as Tsunade. He remembered how strong Ao's soul was. Though she wasn't a ninja, she was an enigma. A deadly enigma. He remembered looking through her records out of suspicion a few years ago, and found out that her history was classified. This only served his suspicion, but she'd found him snooping through her files. At first he was surprised, then scared that she'd snuck up on him without his notice. Of course she'd kicked his ass like many of the other women he'd angered in his life. But after finally asking her, she started to sing like a canary. It was because of that he learned about where she came from and how she ended up in their side of the world. She also told him about things he didn't needed to know about, like how she and Yenma came to be and how they came about balancing their life while raising a young ninja hopeful. She was quite the woman indeed. But you know what? She even took one down just before she died. Yenma chuckled bitterly, wiping a few stray tears from his reddened face. But it was all my fault, Jiraiya. I gave away our position, and minutes later, the entire damn clan came down on us like a wave. There were several waves, actually, but you get the point. Ao saved my ass that day, but I couldn't save her. Sometimes I'd wish that I died with her, or at the very least, I die in her place. But that would be selfish, right? Besides, I have Tenten to take care of. That girl's all I got. At least she died doing what she loved, Yenma. And saving who she loved. The older man warmly said as he watched Yenma down an entire tankard of brown ale, his own stomach burning from sake that he ingested. Quick question, Jiraiya inquired after a few moments, now scratching the back of his head. What? The hunter demanded, his throat still burning from the ale. What are death dealers? Yenma sighed, palming his face with his calloused hand. They're the living dead, bloodsuckers, the damned, night walkers, or whatever the hell you want to call them. You may know them as vampires, and it was I who pissed them off enough to kill my wife. Again, my friend, I'm really sorry to hear that. The veteran hunter chuckled, feeling much better. I'm sure you are, Jiraiya. I'm sure you are, but you aren't here to see a hunter drown in his sorrows, are you? Let's talk mission. I'm pretty sure you and Kyoru are tired of listening to my ranting. That's what I like to hear. Jiraiya grinned earnestly, smacking his friend's back with mirth. Glad to have you back. Yes, I believe that you are the one that holds the mission details. I also suspect that you'll tell me while I prepare. Huh? The sage replied quite eloquently. He was surprised to see the hunter stand up. With a hard face, Yenma sternly said, if the Lady Hokage gave you permission to use my services for the mission, then I can only deduce that I am needed due to my field of expertise. That's a good assumption, but haven't you thought that I just wanted you to come along just for the company? The sage playfully remarked as he followed his friend back into the outlet store. When Jiraiya followed his friend back inside, he saw the man opening a door at the back of the room while muttering how much of a fool the pervert was. Following the hunter even further, the sage learned that the door led them into another, darker room with what he guessed was Yenma's personal stash. The small room within the furthest recesses of the store didn't have weapons on the wall, but had seals on them. Each seal was circular in shape, and at the middle of each seal a picture of a weapon or tool was painted. The sage aging chanced that the picture stood for what was sealed. These were probably some of his favorite weapons. But on top of the seals, along the walls were shelves with scrolls of different sizes. The small ones, he guessed, might have contained at least hundreds of weapons and accessories each. He didn't even want to know how much the bigger ones had. And there was a huge metal strongbox, which was bolted to the ground, in the middle of the room. You fool, the hunter sighed as he opened a strongbox, sealing away weapons that he might need for the mission. If you were to recruit me for informal purposes, then I'd obviously refuse. Simple as that. You'd refuse knowing that Yatsuro died? In a split second, Yenma dropped his sealing scrolls and was already clamping his hardened hands on the sage's collar. He snarled slowly, tell me what happened. Now. The sage coughed, Yenma, you're chalking me. Let go. After Yenma let go of the wheezing sage, he continued, the truth is that I don't really know what happened to Yatsuro. He didn't send me his weekly report, and you know how he is. He wouldn't ignore his duty just like that. So whatever happened to him might be something you can handle. Besides, I'm just a modest, little sage, not a hunter. So you want me to hunt down whatever caused him to not give you your report? The hunter tensed, keeping himself busy by picking up the scroll that he dropped earlier. That is correct. He smiled when he saw Yenma walk to the wall and touched his hand on picture to unseal a weapon that was very familiar to him. I don't quite know what got to him, but whatever did it is something that I'm sure you could handle. After sealing equipment inside the scroll, He tucked it inside a pouch on his belt. With enough preparation, I think I can. What? Jiraiya's form twitched slightly, a few beads of sweat now rolling down his forehead. You're not sure? Aren't you the best hunter out there? The flattered hunter laughed a bit too loudly as he walked towards the far wall, reaching for another scroll. I am in no way, shape or form, the best hunter. My wife was a better hunter. I'd consider myself average, despite the fact that I could best you in a serious fight 6 times out of 10. Jiraiya, the Yanmaki continued before Jiraiya could even talk back. I could tell right now that you think you could take on any of the creatures I hunt if you knew how to beat them. But trust me, old friend, it's not as easy as it sounds. You need to acknowledge that there are monsters out there that are more powerful than you and I combined. Worriedly, Jiraiya's face contorted into a frown. Then how do you suggest we go about this? After he finished putting in his pouch the scrolls that he needed, Yenma strode towards a coat hanger and grabbed a cloak. And with a flick of his dexterous hand, the cloak wrapped around his burly form and concealing his face in shadows. Elementary, my dear Jiraiya. We prepare for the worst. Mount Ashigari. After an hour of rest, the wolf-sized cub had awoken in surprising warmth. Though she couldn't yet see due to her age, she could feel the warmth emanating from somewhere. The hunter had kept a close and watchful eye on her for the entire time, making sure that she got at least some heat from the fire. When he saw the large cub move around and moan, he could tell right away that she was hungry. He was surprised to see it begin to walk because of its early age. However, Fenris were a species that hunters knew little about. Whatever he experiences from then onward may surprise him, but would be understandable. Hopefully, he'd adapt to those changes as well. He was surprised even further when the cub shakily, but steadily, inched towards the water that he placed in a stone bowl in front of it. For though she was temporarily blind, her other senses were working to his relief. After lapping up a good amount of water, it then eagerly moved towards the other bowl beside her. The one with ground fish meat. The hunter took off his dark gray mask and wiped the sweat off from his hazel eyes. While he cooked the fish that he caught, he'd wondered if Fenrir cubs could even eat fish. Right now, he didn't care because his little lady was enjoying her meal. Lady, eh? He said aloud, not talking to anyone in particular. I like the sound of that. After the large cub finished eating her meal, he began to eat a fish that he cooked for himself. He stroked the happily Fenrir cub's fur. I suppose your name is Lady. As he suspected, Lady began to shrink until she was the size of an actual wolf cub, which was easily the size of both his hands combined. The reason why it was so rare to find Fenris was because they had the ability to take on the size of a normal wolf. Though they could grow up to the size of a house, Fenris only do so in order to protect their pack. This thought made the man smile. His little lady was cute and dangerous. He had to be careful though, for Lady probably didn't even know she was changing sizes. She was just a cub, so she didn't yet have the training for controlling her size. He was definitely lucky to have found her. He took a look outside the tent and noticed that it had stopped raining. He then unsealed a bag and poked a few air holes in it using a small utility knife. Then, he gently picked up Lady and placed her inside. He placed back his white mask over his face. It was time to move. After quickly stepping out of his makeshift stone tent, he stretched and left the camping site. He needed to get back to his home, his base of operations. Outside Konoha, they had begun to move, not but a few minutes after they'd done preparing, towards Mount Ashigari. Jiraiya now carried with him a weapon that he hadn't used in a long time. It was the very same weapon that he saw Yenma pack. It wasn't until their departure that it was given back to him, for it had originally belonged to the sage almost 2 decades ago. His weapon was a gun staff, one that he'd been given to by his late sensei. It wasn't really all that special, besides the memories of his active ninja days with it. After his sensei died by Orochimaru's hands, Jiraiya didn't think that he'd use it again. Unlike most staves, a gun staff was presumed to be part of the ancient groups of weapons that were called the grandfather of weapons. This group of weapons, though weren't at all modern, were still very practical in combat, which is why he'd used it. The gun staff in particular was short, compared to the bow staff, and was more compact, which allows for better mobility indoors and outdoors. They were very hardy too, able to bend most blades at the appropriate angle. So, do you remember where he lives, Yenma? Jiraiya asked, not averting his eyes from his path. They were both never really the type to run or jump from tree to tree. They actually preferred to walk than either of those things, but this was a special case. Yatsuro's life was in danger, and they needed to hurry. He was ashamed that he didn't know where his spies lived, for they'd usually give him a place to meet. But he quickly shook away the guilt. There was nothing he could do. All he could do was to rely on Yenma. Rely on him to lead the way and to protect him, should the need arise. He hoped the latter reason wouldn't happen. Yes, the hunter nodded, also not looking away from where he stepped. Mount Ashigari is at the southern side of Lightning Country. It shouldn't be too long of a run since Lightning Country itself is just about north of Fire Country. However, there are 2 countries in between Fire and Lightning, so I give this about half a week of travel at our current pace. Is something on your mind? Jiraiya noticed the man's frown. No, it's all good. I asked Kyoru to tell my daughter that I'd be back in about a week's time, and that he'd train her until I get back. She just started, so I'm worried if she could handle his training. What, he can train her? Is Kyoru a hunter too? The sage asked incredulously, his eyes now on his friend. Why, of course. I wouldn't hire anyone who's not. In fact, probably most of the people that you saw inside the bar is either a hunter or somehow associated with a hunter. The rest are just ninjas. Why? The sage stuttered. What if the hunters planned to do some sort of uprising on Konoha? He knew very well that they'd do a lot, considering how powerful Yenma is. And what made it worse was that Yenma himself said that he was only average in power. Jiraiya, do you know what the true purpose of roadhouses are? The hunter sighed for what seemed to be the 100th time that day. There are more of them? I'm guessing your answer is no. Well, how roadhouses came to be was actually decided a very long time ago. The one that I own in Konoha has actually been there from even before the time when the late Shoden Hokage raised Fire Country as a hidden village. He looked at Jiraiya, who was visibly nodding back at him. Us hunters have been around longer than you think, Jiraiya. There are actually hundreds upon hundreds of roadhouses, all with the same name of the roadhouse, like mine in the world today. They all serve the same purpose of supplying hunters with a place to rest, a bite to eat, and a hell of a lot of toys to play with. Jiraiya smiled at that. So the people who mainly buy from the ninja outlet store aren't actually ninjas, but hunters. Some were probably both. But Yenma, why don't you go to other roadhouses instead of living in and owning one? Most of inactive hunters, like me, own these establishments in order to help, and possibly even guide, some of the hunters that are still active. Active? The Sannin said in confusion. So hunters are part of an order? Some sort of organization? To put it simply, yes. Yenma couldn't help but grin at Jiraiya's frightened expression. It wasn't every day that the great and valiant Jiraiya looked like frightened little coward. After increasing their already velocious speed, Yenma decided to choose his words a bit more carefully. We hunters all answer to one congregation, one high council. We call this group of people the conclave. Whatever they say goes, but as hunters can hunt whatever creature we want, whenever we feel like it. Personally, I don't mind the conclave since they don't send me missions anymore. But when they did, it was only about once every month that they sent me missions. The High Council is pretty powerful, kinda like Konoha's, only there is a lot more people in it because it works on a bigger scale, yes? Jiraiya interrupted, which Yenma didn't mind. That's right. The conclave operates worldwide, he boasted proudly as he jumped over a large bush. We are probably the most powerful, yet secretive organization in the world. Not many know about us hunters, as you may know, but an even smaller amount of people know about the conclave. Wait a minute, the sage stopped in his tracks, a deep frown marring his tattooed face. The hunter stopped after he realized he wasn't following Jiraiya anymore. He knew that Jiraiya didn't spot any danger, but he still turned towards the older man, hoping that he wasn't all too surprised about his profession. What? The hunter asked in mild confusion. Why are you telling me all this? Aren't you afraid that I go and tell Tsunade about you hunters? Aren't you worried that someone may interrogate me about you? No, Yenma answered simply as he walked towards Jiraiya in the middle of the forest's clearing, then placed his hand on Jiraiya's shoulder. You are my friend, Jiraiya. You may be a spy master, but you have good morals. Telling you about his hunter wouldn't tip the great balance's scales at all. But before he could reply, Jiraiya heard something from behind some bushes. Wait, Jiraiya hushed his friend, both of their bodies lowering their center of gravity. I heard something. Me too, Yenma's brows furrowed as he unsealed a wakizashi beneath his cloak and drew it into the air. It's coming from the bushes. Taking out his old gun staff from the holster on his back, Jiraiya readied himself for whatever creature on the other side of the bushes. Outside Ashigari village, he was only a few minutes away from his home, but if he were to make this trip faster, he needed to take the faster route and cut through the village to get to his home on the mountain. Lady, who was currently inside the bag, was tied across his body beneath his cloak. He needed to hurry not because he was damn tired, but because the cub could wake up at any minute. And if she did, he'd have people hounding him about why his pet wolf magically changed its size. He was also aware that she could change sizes even in sleep, which gave him further incentive to hurry the hell up. A few minutes had passed and he was already treading the gates of the big village. A lot of the buildings didn't get past 2 floors, but then again, this was only a logging community. Ashigari Township's main source of income was from the wood it regularly exported to other villages. It was just like any of the other vassal villages that surrounded Kumogakure. He could now hear the hustle and bustle as he reached the marketplace. The skies were still overcast, but it was still a mildly good day. But upon entering a narrow alleyway, he'd heard a few boys heading in his direction. Upon seeing the group, he defensively excreted a bit of killer intent towards the small gang. "Oh, look here guys," the supposed leader Aili grinned. "It looks like this guy is trying to scare us." "Let's kill this guy," a few of the others chorused. Although he was outnumbered, the hunter knew he'd be able to withstand anything these guys threw at him. Besides, them ignoring his killer intent proved that they were only Chunin level. As the men surrounded him, he stared each and every one of them down, assessing the flaws in their stances. He was never one to deny a fight, and he wouldn't stop now. If only they could see the broad smile beneath his mask. He then laughed. "You're kidding me. Thieves? Are you guys dumb, or what? Haven't you at least wondered if I was a ninja or something?" The hunter's confidence aggravated the leader. And in retaliation, the man drew a single katana. "We may be thieves, but we are trained ninja, you bastard. Even a Junin can't touch this many Chunin at once. Guys, let's kick the shit out of this guy." The hunter began to have a headache at the guy's constant yelling. He didn't drop his guard though, for each of the gang members pulled out some sort of bladed weapon. But before they could attack, he disappeared, leaving them all in confusion. Not a moment later, he reappeared, only he didn't wear his cloak or had with him the bag with Lady inside. Instead of his cloak, the men saw his white battle garb, but it didn't do anything to lessen their morale. "It's too bad, really, that you all decided to target me. Even though I didn't plan on this, I'd still kick your asses." The man settled into his stance excitedly. Outraged by the unknown man's tone, one of the thieves raised his tanto overhead and sprinted towards the hunter. In retaliation, the hunter bursted forth, bringing his left hand to intercept the first thief's vertical slash, while his right hand struck the man's throat. He didn't snap the windpiper because he wanted the least amount of death as possible. The one rule that each hunter was supposed to follow, on top of not harming the balance, was to never harm a human. But, he knew that the option of snapping the thief's throat was well within his ability. Once the man was unconscious, the rest of the thieves charged. The hunter didn't care if they did, for the alley was too small for them all to attack at the same time. In fact, the place was so small, that the alley worked as a choke point, forcing all the bandits to attack one by one. He then realized that he needed to hurry, for the little lady might wake up at any second and would cause a commotion in the village. A second thief charged the hunter. He brought his blade to the side to strike with a horizontal slash at the masked stranger. The hunter countered by ducking and grabbing the man's leg, and with a sharp pull, the thief hit the ground hard. The hunter chose the sadistic path and locked the man's heel, twisting it until he heard a sickening snap, followed by a painful scream. The hunter smiled from beneath his mask. Seeing an opening, the third thief aimed his straight sword towards the hunter's stomach, but the hunter blocked by pulling the screaming man's leg, using him as a human shield. Unfortunately for the thief, the sword pierced his crotch. Amidst the bloody cries of pain, the hunter chuckled not too sincerely. "Whoops, is that my fault?" He let go of the second thief's leg, and grabbed the third's armed hand before the man could attempt another strike. The masked hunter disarmed him and then pulled the guy's head towards his already rising knee. And for good measure, he went back to the thief's formerly armed hand and effectively broke the thief's wrist. The remaining bandits were astonished to see their 3 comrades fall, and cringed when they saw the third thief's arm twist full circle. Thinking that the masked man couldn't defend himself against multiple opponents, 2 of the thieves charged him, each with a knife in hand. Laughing, the hunter stomped onto the tanto that was dropped from the first guy, causing the small blade to whip into the air, spinning. He grabbed it just in time to block a synchronized attack from the 2 gang members. While still in a standstill, the masked hunter stepped towards the one standing to his right and side-kicked him in the stomach, effectively lifting the thief into the air and into a wall. The man limply crumpled into the ground. Unconsciousness claimed his wretched form. While the hunter was busy kicking his friend into a wall, the other thief who was left at the standstill tried to chop at the hunter's torso. However, the masked man was too fast. The hunter used the momentum from the kick to execute a spinning back fist right before the bandit could land his strike. The hunter then stabbed the man in the arm with the tanto, and pinned him to a brick wall. Crimson warmth dripped from the thief's arm, and the hunter let go of the weapon so the man could hopefully die of blood loss peacefully without looking at his killer. This technically didn't count as breaking the rules since he didn't finish the guy off. And besides, it wasn't guaranteed that the bandit would die. The hunter then wondered if these chunin had any skill with jutsus. Ironically, he heard someone behind him chanting and launching at him some sort of lightning jutsu. He backflipped at the last second, narrowly dodging the lightning bolt. He unsealed a single kunai and whipped it towards the jutsu's caster at the apex of his flip. When he landed back on the ground, he heard more cries of pain, for he pinned the man's foot to the ground. The thief tried to clutch at the kunai, trying to free himself of being pinned. However, he didn't get the chance because a strike to his temple caused him to black out. "Lights out," the hunter said before settling back into a relaxed stance. "Anyone else wants to go to sleep?" But there were no replies. He chuckled when he realized that all the thieves were neutralized, on the ground, battered and broken. Laughing once more, he took a quick breath before body flickering onto a rooftop. It was there that found the bag with Lady inside. He checked to see if the Fenrir cub was sleeping just in case. He tied it once again to his torso, then flicked back on his favorite cloak. Jumping down into the alleyway, where the bandits lay motionless, he continued to trek towards his home. Fire Country border. As he watched Yenma dashing towards the bushes, Jiraiya began to call forth his sage powers just in case whatever was behind the bushes was something they could handle. He closed his eyes, feeling the warm power surge throughout his burly form. Although his eyes were closed, he could see a full 360 degrees around him, even things from miles away. Or at least the life force of every living thing within his range. However, what he saw next perplexed the sage, for thing behind the bush had a chakra signature he'd seen before. Unfortunately, he couldn't put his thumb on it. Who was this stranger? A sudden realization came to him. Opening his eyes, he stopped using sage powers and jumped over the bush. He prayed to God that Yenma didn't yet attack. "Wait," he desperately roared as he saw Yenma stalk towards a dark figure. "Don't attack." When he landed on the ground, he saw Yenma pounce on a young man's form. The young man, who wore black, tattered robes, managed to escape Yenma's vice-like grip. "Naruto!" Jiraiya cried when he saw the 14-year-old run away from him and Yenma, but had ultimately failed to do so. The Yenmaki unsealed his Zweihander, a monster of a blade, and poised it towards the blonde's sweaty neck. The toad sage couldn't move as his friend was just about to kill what appeared to be his former student. That's all for now. If you enjoy, then please like, share and do comments.